Here we have Prabhupada walking with the devotees, and the gentleman to the right of Srila Prabhupada is Vasudeva. At this time he was Deoji Punja, and he was the prime mover of Krishna consciousness in Fiji in those early days. Srila Prabhupada was very affectionate towards Vasudeva and his whole family, because here was an Indian gentleman outside of ISKCON, because ISKCON hadn't been officially established there in the country yet, and he was taking it upon his shoulders to propagate Krishna consciousness, and he had a distinct love for Srila Prabhupada, as you see from his body language.
I had some business in Australia, Sydney, rice business. From my office, I saw some people, devotees, shaved head with saris, kurta. They're distributing the prasad, chanting Hare Krishna on the street. And I thought in my mind, who have changed these people? So I asked some devotees there, who is your guru and how you came to Hare Krishna movement? They said, our guru is Prabhupada, and he is coming after 1 month. Then after that I asked the rice growers people in the office, these people are chanting Hare Krishna, and who are they? They're taking drug and just chanting Hare Krishna. So I decided, let me go to stay in their temple. So I stayed 2 nights there. I saw early morning they wake up 3 o'clock, cold shower they take, and the arti and singing Hare Krishna mantra. Who have changed these people? So I decided to meet Prabhupada. Suddenly I have some business in Fiji, so I came back. Prabhupada came to Melbourne. Nandrani met Prabhupada in temple and asked Prabhupada when Prabhupada going to Hawaii. Nandrani asked, can you tell me also the flight number? So Prabhupada told devotees, tell them the flight number. So Nandrani got the flight number, and Nandrani rang to us in Fiji. So Prabhupada's flight is staying half an hour. Nearly 2,000 people came to greet Prabhupada. We had advertised in papers and radio. When the flight came there, jumbo jet, when I saw Prabhupada, I suddenly paid dandot obeisances. And first question Prabhupada asked me, is there any Radha Krishna temple here? So I said, no, Prabhupada, there is no Radha Krishna temple. There are so many small temples here, but not Radha Krishna temple. So you build nice, in Hindi, Badhiya sa mandir banao, he told me. I said, I'll try my best to build that temple. After 20-minute discussion, I paid obeisances to Prabhupada. And when I stand up, Prabhupada put his hand on my head. And I feel just like all my sins have gone. I began to cry completely. Prabhupada said, from today, you chant 16 rounds. And from that day, I start chanting. I used to wake up 3 o'clock and I used to chant 16 rounds every day.
There was certain Indian gentlemen who had this awe and respect for Srila Prabhupada, devotees such as Kartikeya Mahadevia and Mr. Shetty in Bombay. They act like old devotees from previous lifetime, old Vaishnavas that were reigniting their relationship with Srila Prabhupada in this lifetime. The unique position of Deoji, or Vasudeva, as he was initiated, was that he was the CEO of a very large and important many companies in Fiji. He was way up there in the elite of Indian businessmen. So he owned a chain of grocery stores. That was one of the retail businesses they had. And when the devotees were taken through the grocery stores, and we came to the butcher shop, and we were aghast, like, how is this possible? And when it was asked of Srila Prabhupada, well, what should we advise Vasudeva to do? Should we tell him that he should close down the butcher shop? And Srila Prabhupada said, no, he doesn't have to close the butcher shop at this time. See, this will come. We were just black and white, cut and dry devotees. We had no nuances in our approach towards Krishna consciousness because we were immature, spiritually immature, even at this so-called late date in our spiritual life, 1975. Prabhupada could understand that Vasudeva was in business. The business was well established in the islands for many, many years. And Vasudeva had his brothers and uncles and aunts, and his family was well immersed in this business. And for Prabhupada to say, no, you have to close down the butcher shop, that would be a point of controversy amongst the family members. Only Vasudeva at that time had fully embraced Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada could understand that if Vasudeva became strong, if there weren't any preconditions put on his relationship with Srila Prabhupada having to do with his business, then eventually he would win over all his other family members. And as it turned out, most of Vasudeva's family members did embrace Vaishnavism. And some of them actually took initiation.
Vasudeva invited him that next time when you pass from Nandi to Hawaii, next year you come and stay in Fiji.
Stay in Fiji. Prabhupada says, I'll write to you when I can come. So Prabhupada wrote a letter to me. I'm coming in 1975. He rang from Hawaii. Have you got the land? I said, no. Then I decided I got the land, so I'll donate this land to ISKCON. Build a nice temple. We gave a contract for $330,000. I didn't have any idea of how to build a temple. When I sent a copy of a plan to Prabhupada in Mayapur, Prabhupada says, why you build a dome in front? The architect said front people can see from the road. Now dome should be where the deities are. So we have to make so much alteration for that.
And he said the roof should be concrete. For collection, Vasudeva used to go early in the morning, 6 o'clock, with a BTG in his hand and Prabhupada's photo there.
As soon as they see Prabhupada's photo, someone gives $1,000, some $500, some $2,000. Within 2 months, I collected $40,000.
And then we got some loan from bank.
Yeah.
When Prabhupada first came, in the morning he was going for morning walk to Marine Drive in Lautoka. And after coming from morning walk, we had Guru Puj. His first program in Natambua Hall, Lautoka.
Yeah.
And the hall was full with people.
Upstairs, downstairs, 2,000 people was there.
Prabhupada gave lecture for 20 minutes in English. So Vasudeva requested, many Indians are here who don't understand English, so can you speak in Hindi? So Prabhupada gave same lecture in Hindi. And then he gave one program in Nandi, Ramakrishna Mission, and one at Ba. It was in theatre.
I used to go every day to see Prabhupada at about 4 o'clock. When I finished my business, then I used to sit down with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada used to tell me about Bhagavatam. We used to talk to each other.
Once he didn't come, so after lunch and rest, he rang to call Vasudeva. Then we were sitting in the veranda, and one devotee was there, Sajjan Ashri. He asked Prabhupada that local people say that Kalia is here in Fiji. And Prabhupada asked, are there any wild creatures here, like wild lion and serpents? And he said no. Then he said, then Kalia must be, maybe here. And after that he changed
Name
to make Krishna Kalia temple.
Some of the Hindus had said that this is Kalia, who has come to Fiji when he was banished from the waters of the Jamuna, and that this big snake was living up in a big lake up on the top of a mountain where nobody went. And in Fiji, there's no snakes. So they told Prabhupada that. And Prabhupada said, yes. He said, then it is possible, because where there's the big snake, there's no small snakes, because the big snake will eat the small snakes. So one devotee, he took up the challenge to go to this lake. According to the superstition, if you went to this lake, you wouldn't come back or you would become insane. But not many people know how to get there. So he had to get a guide. And so he paid this guide some money. And he was a little bit reluctant, but finally he agreed. So they started to hike up there, and a big storm came up, big typhoon. winds were blowing, trees were knocked over. So the guide became spooked. And he said, no, no, this is the sign we're not supposed to go. So he abandoned him. So the devotee thought, well, I'm going to do it. So he didn't know how to get there, but he still tried to persevere. But the storm became too violent, and he couldn't do it. So because of that folktale, Vasudeva established the Krishna Kaliya temple. And it's a unique deity of Krishna dancing on the head of the Kaliya serpent.
Then the next trip, Prabhupada came in 1976.
Yeah, so lay foundation.
To lay foundation.
Yeah.
At that time we got initiation.
Yeah. I told Prabhupada, my brother Bhuvan Mohan will take initiation. Yes, you 3. So next day Prabhupada told Parindra Das, make it ready, the yagna, and I'll give initiation.
He asked Prabhupada, I want to take initiation from you. Prabhupada said, okay, save your hand.
So myself and both save hand and we got ready to take initiation.
After initiation, the next morning, Prabhupada called us in his room and gave second initiation next day to both of
But
us.
before, Bhuvan says, I'm drinking tea, Prabhupada. From today you leave tea, tomorrow don't take tea. Then Bhuvan said, I'm chanting other mantra also, Prabhupada. He says, this Hare Krishna mantra will conquer that. Prabhupada gave him initiation.
And he presented first Mala to Vasudeva Prabhu, then to me, and then to Bhuvan Mohan.
Upendra went to Fiji first, about a month before I arrived. And I believe it was September 1970. We were in Suva. People used to call us Mr. and Mrs. Swamiji, which we thought was very funny at that time, you know, because we wore our yellow dhoti and sari. When we were in Fiji, an Indian family had given us a small Lord Nrsimhadev deity. I still have him. He was always our deity who presided over our center and our preaching there in Fiji. He was the first Nrsimhadev deity that appeared in our movement, you know, so that was very significant. He was given to us soon after we had arrived there. On Sundays, we had a feast, and our place would be packed with Fijian people and Indian people. So they took very enthusiastically to the feast. Upendra always wrote to Prabhupada about the difficulties that we were running into and the criticisms, and one of the sadhus next door wanted to chant Hare Rama first instead of Hare Krishna first, and Prabhupada just, you know, wrote back and said, well, if he insists on chanting Hare Rama first, what is the harm? You know, he's still chanting. And part of it was a criticism about the color yellow for our dhotis and saris. And Prabhupada answered back that usually white dhoti and colorful saris are what's worn in India, but when someone's engaged in preaching activities or devotional activities, they may wear yellow, and your life is always involved in preaching activities. So you may put on a white dhoti if you like, if you want, that is fine. He was always instructing us every step of the way. Upendra would write him letters 2 or 3 times a month. So he was our guiding force all the way through. We really took to heart and felt like we had been given a responsibility to follow Lord Chaitanya's prediction that in every town and village there would be chanting of the holy name. So we literally went to every little village that we could, and often we're hosted in a very humble place, ancient temples of Narayan or Kali or whatever, but we would hold a program and all the villagers would come. There would be simple prasadam. Then we'd go on to another village and make our rounds. We went to Lotoka. We had met Vasudev's father, who was a very elderly man at that point, and his 5 sons, of whom Vasudev was one of them. His father was a very devotional man and was always wanting to help in any way he could. And then we heard later how Vasudev had come around to want to know more about Krishna consciousness and follow Prabhupada. And it was very exciting for us to see that from our humble beginnings, that Vasudev was going to take up the mission and carry on Krishna consciousness there under Prabhupada's supervision.
When we arrived in Fiji, I remember it was practically 1 o'clock in the morning after our flights from Australia, and it was Ekadasi. Of course, there was no temple then. We were staying at one Indian family's house, and they had prepared prasadam for all of us. And of course, it wasn't Ekadasi prasadam, but Prabhupada just said, it's okay, and that was it. So we took prasadam. So then we went to bed around 2:30 or 3 o'clock. So then, as Prabhupada did everywhere, when the sun was ready to come up, Prabhupada was ready for his morning walk. And that was always the case. It didn't matter how much Prabhupada was traveling, if he stayed in a place for 2 days or 2 weeks. As soon as Prabhupada got to the next place, he set his watch and he set his body, and he just continued on. There was never any question, jet lag. The word didn't exist with Prabhupada. It wasn't something anyone talked about. Prabhupada never exhibited it. We went out on the morning walk, and he would walk as quickly as he did everywhere for about an hour to an hour and a half. And then we had a program. Prabhupada always had a morning program, and he spoke. And then we had prasadam. And then Paramahamsa and I, we were just waiting for the opportunity to sleep again, because we only had like 3 hours of sleep, and for us that was just really difficult. And we were hoping after breakfast Prabhupada would take a nap. So I brought Prabhupada his breakfast, and then when he was finished, I came and took everything out, and Prabhupada laid down. So, I went back, I said, Prabhupada's resting. So Paramahamsa and I, we laid down. Of course, we fell asleep. We were out. And Prabhupada maybe took 15 minutes or something, and he was up. So finally I heard a bell ring. So I went into Prabhupada's room, and it happened a few times where I would literally try to wake up as I was offering obeisances and exercise my eyes. So Prabhupada couldn't tell that I was sleeping. And I sat up, and as soon as I sat up, he said, why are you sleeping? Like dead men. Everyone's awake, the karmis are all working, but not the devotees. No, they're sleeping. He said, you're sleeping very soundly. Why are you sleeping? And of course, when Prabhupada asked, why were you doing something wrong? I never had a response, because whatever you said, he would just take that apart. So I just said, oh, Prabhupada, I'm sorry. And what about Paramahamsa? Why is he sleeping? He said, call him in here. And he goes in, and immediately Prabhupada says, you're a sannyasi. Your business is to minimize bodily demands, minimize sleeping, minimize eating. He said, why are you sleeping? And Paramahamsa said, well, Prabhupada, I have jet lag. And I thought, oh no. And Prabhupada said, jet lag? He said, well, we just flew from here and done this. And Prabhupada said, so? He said, I'm also flying. I'm doing the same thing. I'm awake. And then he said, all right, go on. Go sleep if you want. So we'll go back to the room. And of course, we wouldn't sleep. And sometimes 5 minutes would go by, or sometimes a half hour, and he'd ring the bell again. And you'd go in, and then he'd tell you to start reading, and he'd tell you some stories or something, and you would just know that he wasn't angry with you. He was always trying to save us from our own bad habits, and trying to show us that becoming Krishna conscious is serious business, and one has to follow the process. Otherwise, gradually, one can fall away. But that was one of the things he would do after chastising. He would always have a way of being extra special nice a little later on, and then we knew that he loved us so much.
first time I saw Srila Prabhupada was in the LA airport. I think it must have been about 200 devotees went to greet him. We were a huge crowd and a loud kirtan, and everyone was pushing forward. And there was a space above the partition where the passengers were coming out, and you were able to see. If it was a tall person, I remember a Stetson hat came by and something else came by, and then we could understand, oh, is that? No, that's not Prabhupada. And we kept pushing forward more and more, and the kirtan was bigger and bigger. And then I felt someone pushing behind me, and I thought, that's odd because I'm at the back of the crowd. I was a very new devotee. So then I turned to look, and there were two businessmen behind me, sort of mid-20s, you know, suits and briefcases and everything else, but they were looking and looking to see who we were waiting for. Then suddenly we saw a danda raised above the partition, and we knew, oh, Prabhupada must be coming. So then Prabhupada came out, and we all paid our obeisances, and there was the most amazing feeling, like a tidal wave rushing through me from the very depths of my being and pouring out, and I just cried and cried and cried. And then finally, when I stood up to go and follow the devotees who were following Srila Prabhupada, I turned, and these two businessmen were standing there with tears pouring down their faces. It was such an amazing experience to see how they were touched just by a moment's association with Srila Prabhupada.
Those times in New Dwarka when he would come in through the right-hand curtain, he would bow flat, you know, down. The Govinda prayers would be so beautifully floating in the atmosphere. And then he would stand up and look at Gornitai with his hands folded, and he would do in front of Rukmini Dwarkadish the same thing. It's just the same things that we would always do, but when Srila Prabhupada was there, you understood the depth. I mean, you couldn't understand his depth, but your appreciation for Dandavats would increase unlimitedly by seeing Srila Prabhupada pay Dandavats to the deities. When we built the new temple room in New Dwarka, I remember the first time he came to visit there. That was the first time he ever looked me in the eye. And I was jumping so high just because he was there, and just because he's such an ecstatic personality, I just couldn't help jumping. And I remember him looking at me and looking a little surprised at how demonstrative I was.
The day that we inaugurated the temple, it was Bhaktisiddhanta's disappearance. That day Prabhupada said, I'm not going to sit on the Vyasasana. He took Bhaktisiddhanta's picture and put it on the Vyasasana where he would normally sit. So we spent most of the day cooking and spending the day with Prabhupada. And towards the end of the day, we were reading the prayers that Prabhupada offered to his spiritual master, that famous Vyasa Puja offering. And Tamal Krishna started reading it, and he started crying. And so then he gave it to Brahmananda. And then Brahmananda started reading, and he started crying. He gave it to Gargamuni. And Gargamuni started reading, he started crying. And so this way it was handed down to different devotees. And eventually, by Krishna's grace, we got through the reading. And then after that, Prabhupada had a kirtan, and Prabhupada was dancing with the devotees, just like Lord Chaitanya, surrounded by his associates. And Prabhupada held up his hands and just started dancing from side to side. I remember looking around, and everybody was up dancing and chanting and crying uncontrollably. Everybody was dancing and chanting and crying uncontrollably. Prabhupada put us directly into Chaitanya Lila. He was so powerful. You had a direct experience of Chaitanya Lila by his potency.
we simply follow the predecessor's instruction. That's it. Our movement is very easy because we haven't got to manufacture something.
Nowadays, a lot of devotees like to speak of Prabhupada as being very soft and compassionate. There's no doubt about that. But his compassion often would manifest in the most determined, focused way. He was the personification of the expression strictly business. He had a mission to do, and left no doubts that he had a mission to do. And he expected his followers to be his assistants in his mission, and he would thank them for that, for helping him to please his spiritual master. If you will simply print and distribute my books in every language of the world, all over the world, automatically Krishna consciousness will spread. That was spoken in Los Angeles. I never forgot that. It was like the master stroke for ending all kinds of speculation. Prabhupada just laid it on the line. It was not that the ISKCON leaders were fanatical. It's just that Prabhupada laid it all on the line, and this is what he said. What could we do? Except try to fulfill his desire the way he said it would be fulfilled. That was our only value. Back then, devotees knew our only value is to just try to fulfill Prabhupada's desire the way he wants it fulfilled.
We are receiving the transcendental knowledge through Guru Parampara, succession. So we have to simply take instruction from Guru, and if we execute that to our heart and soul, that is success. That is practical. I have no personal qualification, but I simply try to satisfy my Guru. That's all. My Guru Maharaj asked me that if you get some money, you print books.
Prabhupada was teaching us the Sri Upanishad in the mornings. We could barely do anything. I mean, at least certainly myself. And the Sanskrit was just a blur, at least to us. And Prabhupada was teaching us the Sanskrit. And he would offer his obeisances before the three altars, and when he would sit down, we would all bow down. And then we would come up and we would chant the mantras. And only Jayatirtha really was learning them, and a couple of the devotees. And after maybe a week of this, he could tell we weren't taking it seriously. Prabhupada said, I am writing these books for you. You have to know these books. He said, if someone stops and asks you, can you read this, the Sanskrit? And you say, no, I'm not reading, I'm just selling. Prabhupada said, what is that? I'm writing these books for you. And it was just pleading with us, so then we took it very seriously after that to learn the Sanskrit.
Yes. So I took up this from his mouth, that he's very fond of books. And he told me personally that if you get some money, print books. Therefore I am stressing on this point. Where is book, where is book, where is book? So kindly help me. This is my request. Print as many books in as many languages and distribute throughout the whole world. Then Krishna consciousness movement will automatically increase.
The dance troupe portion of the Vaikuntha Players was in town, and they asked me to do musical accompaniment for a special showing, The Killing of Pralambasura, in the old temple room, only for Srila Prabhupada. There was narration from the Krishna book, and they acted out a dance drama pastime. So only Srila Prabhupada, his servant, and maybe one other devotee were in the temple room at the time. And I sat at Prabhupada's lotus feet with a mridanga, singing different bhajans to accompany the pure dance segment of the dance drama. And occasionally I would look up at Srila Prabhupada to see his reaction. And when Lord Balaram, killed Pralambasura, striking him with his fist. At that moment, I looked up at Srila Prabhupada, and his mouth dropped open, his eyes got very wide, and then he began smiling and laughing, and you could see he was totally immersed in the pastime, and he really expressed his appreciation of how hearing the pastimes was so important. And that's what made this so special, was that the story came to life by hearing the words of the pure devotee right from Krishna book, and then the dance accompanying it.
It happened on 3 different occasions. I went in and Prabhupada was reading Krishna book. And he said, if you just read this one book, you can be Krishna conscious. He said, you don't have to read hundreds of books, just this one book. And he had his glasses on, and I was sitting in front of him. Then he just looked at me and he said, you don't even have to read the whole book, just one chapter. If you just read one chapter of this book, you can be Krishna conscious. And I'm just nodding my head, yes, Prabhupada. But he just kept staring. And then he said, you don't even have to read the whole chapter, just one page. And he just ran his finger down the page. And then he's looking, and he said, you don't even have to read the whole page, just one line. And he ran his finger across the line of the Krishna book. And I said, yes, Prabhupada. And he's still looking. And he said, you don't even have to read a whole line, just one word. And he pointed to a word in the book. He said, just one word of this book, if you read, you can become Krishna conscious, because Krishna is in every word. And then he put his head back down into the book, and I offered obeisances and I left. But he said that about 3 different books to me over a year. If you just read this one book, once it was Nectar Devotion, once it was Bhagavad Gita, once it was Krishna book. But he said, any one of these, if you just read this one book, you can be Krishna conscious. You can understand Krishna is in every word. And this is what Prabhupada gave us. Nobody else has given us this. This direct connection to Krishna through his pure devotee.
Different people are coming to visit Prabhupada, so everybody's bringing Prabhupada something. So the first person comes in, gives Prabhupada a nice gold Omega watch, real gold watch. Prabhupada says, thank you very much, puts it on, takes the watch he had on, and gives it to whoever was there. Then another person comes in, gives Prabhupada a gold Rolex watch. That must have been at least $3,500. He takes off the gold Omega, gives that away to somebody, puts the gold Rolex watch on, thank you very much. Then another person comes in and gives Prabhupada a Seiko, the cheapest of all 3 of them, right? Maybe it was a $100 watch. Prabhupada says, oh, takes the gold Rolex, gives that away, puts the Seiko on, thank you very much. You can see, Prabhupada was simply accepting on behalf of Krishna. Nothing like, oh, wow, save this one for me or put it in my drawer. Nothing like this, just whatever you're giving is, I'm taking on Krishna's behalf. You would see that in Prabhupada all the time, No mundane attachment.
I was making pillowcases and curtains and bed covers. There's also one pillowcase I made with tassels on the end, and Prabhupada's leaning against that and playing with the tassel. Prabhupada watched me cleaning, particularly his desk. He would sit behind the desk, and I would take all the things off the desk, wipe the whole desk, and then wipe each article and put it back exactly where it was before. And Prabhupada really liked that. He told me, it is very nice how you're cleaning and putting things exactly the way it was before.
The first time that Prabhupada came to the new Los Angeles temple, it was done so nicely with all the marble, all the decorations, flowers being showered down, and playing Jamuna's Govindam. And then Prabhupada went up to his apartment. Bhavananda had done the painting, blue walls, the white ceiling and the orange curtains. That was the standard. It was so nice with the incense. And I said, Prabhupada, this is heaven. And Prabhupada looked at me and he grimaced. He said, heaven? This is Vaikuntha. There is a big difference between heaven and Vaikuntha.
And Bhaktivinoda Thakur stated that he was leaving this planet with his work unfinished.
Then let us finish. We are descendants of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So he kept unfinished so that we shall get the chance to finish it. That is his mercy. He could have finished immediately. He's Vaishnava, he's all powerful. But he gave us the chance. It is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's mercy. The air carries different flavor of the physical elements.
This is probably the most intimate scene we've ever filmed of Srila Prabhupada. Vishaka was doing the recording of the sound, and I was shooting the 16mm camera. Really, the reason we got a chance to film this scene goes back to the Gurpurnim Festival of 1974, where we premiered the first ISKCON film documentary, The Hare Krishna People. Srila Prabhupada appreciated that film and encouraged us to make more films. I thought at that time that I would eventually want to make a documentary on Srila Prabhupada's life. So I asked him if that would be possible. And his reply was, what is the need? And I said, in the future, people will want to know who started the Hare Krishna movement. Srila Prabhupada thought for a moment and then gave his consent to make the film. We didn't have a script at that time. I just thought we should film Srila Prabhupada in as many different situations as possible. So in the summer of 1975, Srila Prabhupada came to LA, and we shot more film during that week than I think any other period of time. I was most nervous shooting this scene of Srila Prabhupada translating, really in fear of disturbing him. But we can see that he was totally absorbed in his translation. And I don't think anyone else could have done that, to have a large 16mm camera pointed at them, at the same time being fully absorbed in their work. And it really must have been a distraction for him, because we had set up lights inside, otherwise there wasn't enough light. And actually at the end of this scene he looks up and speaks to me, and at that point I panicked and immediately turned off the camera. So it was just definitely his mercy that he allowed us to film so many different varieties of scenes during that time in Los Angeles.
I stayed in LA from 73 till 76, and whenever Srila Prabhupada was visiting, I would rise very early, sometimes at 1 o'clock, 1:30 was normal, and I would go behind the temple. And there was an alleyway behind the LA temple. There was a laundromat that the devotees used, and it was dark and creepy at night. But anyhow, I went there, and standing behind the temple, you could look up at Srila Prabhupada's quarters, his darshan room window, and he was always there, no matter how early I got up. He was always already sitting there, and sometimes I could hear him softly chanting japa. It's mostly summer there, and the windows were open, or quite often I would hear him translating. And I would chant my japa softly down there and think that I was protecting Srila Prabhupada, because it was a dark alley and he was silhouetted in the window. You could see him, and I was always afraid someone would come. You know, it was the time of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and these people had been shot. So I used to get up early and chant there and protect Prabhupada. But it was nice because I felt like it was a little time with him. I could hear him translating or hear him chanting.
Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives in this connection a description of the difference of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and ordinary living being.
The first time we were in Los Angeles, Srila Prabhupada went down there from San Francisco. This is in Los Angeles, 1968. And at that time, we joined him. Prabhupada was living in this apartment that was so noisy. There was a guy who liked loud music at night, which was disturbing to Prabhupada. But one of the things that happened there that's very nice, Prabhupada had started teaching us up in San Francisco. This is just after he returned to America. We had expressed a desire to learn Bengali and Sanskrit. So every day we would come into his room at a certain time, and he would recite the alphabet, and we would recite it after him. And then he would talk about it. I really wanted to be able to read Chaitanya Charitamrita, but I couldn't because I didn't know the language. So Prabhupada taught me one verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita, which, by the way, was not printed at this time. Remember, there's only his big Chaitanya Charitamrita, which was always open every morning when I cleaned his room. That's what he would read in the early morning times, was his Chaitanya Charitamrita. I would find it open. It was beautiful. It just glowed. And I would clean it very nicely, and I would wish that I could read it and everything. He knew that I had this affection for Chaitanya Charitamrita. And so he taught me a verse from it. And he would ask me to sing it every day. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Nityanando Shahodito Gora Daye Pushpa Banto Chitra Shando Tamonito. And he explained that the meaning of this verse is that normally the sun and the moon don't rise together. But in this case, both the sun and the moon have arisen over the land of Goda. And they're Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, who are just like the sun and the moon, and they're dispelling all the darkness of the world. And every day he would say, Govindasi, have you remembered that verse? And I would sing it to him. I never forgot it. And he was so happy. He was so delighted. So then we went down to LA, and many times he would ask me, have you remembered that verse? And I would sing it to him. He loved it. While we were in LA that time, this is the first time, we would sit at the kitchen table and write the letters. We were learning the alphabets of Sanskrit, Devanagari. And one time Prabhupada came into the room, and he looked over our shoulder at what we were doing for a few minutes. And then he said, Krishna does not need our service. He simply needs our love. He simply needs to see we're trying to serve him. Just like the teacher may see that the child is making scribbles, but he sees that the child is trying, so he feels happy. So it's like that. Krishna doesn't need anything from us, but he wants our love. He wants to see that we are trying to love him. It was a very profound instruction. And that was a very sweet time. I was working on the cover of the Gita, the original Gita, the purple one, and he was supervising it. It was a universal form. It had a lot of arms, but Macmillan took them all off. But the drawing that Prabhupada had me do had lots of arms. So Prabhupada would come in, and over my shoulder he would guide me in doing that. When Prabhupada took a nap, I would sit quietly and read. The books that Gorsunder had gotten were the Chaitanya Charitamrita. They were done by an Indian. They were the only Chaitanya Charitamrita in English prior to Prabhupada's. 7 skinny little books that Gorsunder had bought at some Indian store in New York. It wasn't Gaudiya Math. It was a translation by some scholar, but they were nice. They were better than nothing. And so I used to sit on the floor and read them while Prabhupada was resting, because we didn't have any books. Just remember, the Gita hadn't been printed. There was only the 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam. So I would sit and read them, and Prabhupada could see how much we liked them. And that was when he decided that he would translate Chaitanya Charitamrita. And Gorsunder was learning Bengali, so he would do the transliteration. He would give me a tape every day, and I would transcribe it. If you look in the front part of Chaitanya Charitamrita, some of my friends have requested me to do. It's because we were so eager to have Chaitanya Charitamrita.
Of course, it was difficult to get on Prabhupada's morning walk. The scene that stands out in my mind is one or two cars parked in that alleyway next to Prabhupada's quarters on Watseka Avenue. 2 cars ready to go, packed, just packed with the most competitive sannyasis and senior devotees who would do anything to get on that morning walk with Prabhupada. And if you weren't in that top echelon, it was pretty tough to get on those walks. But anyway, somehow or other, from the lower echelons, I did get onto a couple of them. One thing I remember is just how much Prabhupada walked and how fast Prabhupada walked. I was so grateful to be on the walk, and then I was so exhausted trying to keep up with Prabhupada and the devotees. It was really quite something.
Prabhupada had become very disturbed. He had learned that his manuscripts that he had written through amazing sacrifice of sleep, he stayed up at night and dictated his books. They had been sent in to our New York BBT office, and they had not done the production. He had written so many books with commentaries, and they were just lying there. So Prabhupada had flown into Los Angeles, and it was a very tense beach walk. He was discussing how important it was to publish these books, and how upset he was that they were lying there, and he was demanding that they be published right away. He then asked, how long will it take? So Radha Ballava from New York was there, because he had been the production manager. So we pulled ourselves back, and we discussed, how long will it take you to get me the book so I can send them to the printer? And he told me that he thought we could do 1 book every 2 months. I mean, at this point, we were doing 1 book every 4 to 6 months. So we went back into the walk, we caught up again, and we told Prabhupada, we think we can do 1 book every 2 months. So Prabhupada turned around and said, I want all 17 books done in 2 months. I just blurted out, Prabhupada, that's impossible. At that point, Prabhupada stopped walking, and he had a cane, and he planted it in the sand, and he turned around and looked at me very gravely and said, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. And there was complete silence. We were all stunned. We were just completely stunned. Here's Prabhupada, perfectly in touch with Krishna, telling us that this can be done. It seemed to defy the physical laws as we knew it. So after some very long moments of silence, Prabhupada started walking immediately, and the senior devotees, they just turned and started staring at me, like, so what are you going to do? So this was a matter of just absolute blind faith. Either you believed or you did not believe. It was that type of moment where you commit. Never mind what your intelligence is telling you is possible. So Radha Ballava and I kind of fell back again, and we just started talking again. We have to do this. This can be done. And all of a sudden, we started coming up with ideas that we hadn't thought of. And we just started getting ideas of different parallel production lines and turning the production lines into 24-hour production lines with 2 or 3 shifts, and recruiting devotees from all over to help us with this, and on and on and on. And this was all happening in the span of just a few minutes. We were just being flooded with these ideas. And we both realized that in order to do this, we all had to be together in one central place. And it seemed more logical to do it in Los Angeles. We have the housing for everybody, and we can expand easily. So then we caught up to the walk, and we said to Srila Prabhupada, if we're going to do this, we have to move the entire BBT division from New York to Los Angeles. The art department, the production, everything. And Srila Prabhupada approved that. He said, fine, do it immediately. And we started.
I was a very fast typist in the composing department, so they were trying to round up any of the past composers to get them all on board. And they flew me out from New Vrindavan to Los Angeles. I tell you, that was so nectarian that because of the support system that Ramaswar set up, a family was designated to cook or to maintain that devotee, do their laundry, feed them. Because we were staying up in the nighttime, kind of irregular schedules, just to keep it around the clock, all the composers, the composing machines filled up. I saw as the days went on in typing this nectar from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the pastimes, the loving relationships between Lord Chaitanya and the devotees, that it was so sweet. I was able to just go beyond whatever limits I had before. And I was up all night and day practically. Just stopped to chant and to eat and sleep very little. And in fact, on one morning walk, Radha Vallabha had said to Prabhupada, Prabhupada, there's one Mataji who is practically not eating or sleeping. She's just typing all day and night. And Prabhupada said, yes, she is running on spiritual energy. He was speaking about me, as he told me later.
So the 17 books got published. The last book came out probably on the last day of the 2-month cycle. And we called the secretary and we told him, it's done. We gave up everything and somehow it happened. This is a very happy time. Everybody's feeling that there's nothing we can't do now. We can spread this movement anywhere in the world. There was no limitation on anything. That's how we were all feeling. Not just the devotees who immediately were involved, but devotees all over the world were feeling that there are no material restraints or limitations. And so it was really a great moment for everybody to just expand their book distribution and their convincing people to join the temples. It was just one of those great times.
There was such a innocence, enthusiastic innocence that made everything very, very beautiful. And I just remember at all the programs, everyone would come with so much enthusiasm and excitement, all cleanly, freshly showered with beautiful fresh tilak. Prabhupada's presence was so powerful that he actually transformed us physically, not just in the heart. When I look at pictures in the BTG from that period, everybody looked very, very beautiful. So that was a very, very special time how he infused us. And actually, when I first came to the temple in Brooklyn, I was attracted by the love that the devotees oozed out. You know, they were so welcoming and everyone wanted to serve. It was like a privilege. Like even at the offerings, especially the 4 o'clock offering, there would be pies and cakes and cookies and ice creams. And if you stood there like 10 minutes before the offering or something, there would be like 15 women coming from different parts of the community with their dishes to be offered. It was like in the Stories of Krishna book. So Prabhupada's influence when he was here was like that. It just was very enlivening. And he was just directing us towards Krishna, really, not towards himself. When I think on all the other gurus that I met before Prabhupada, no one directed you toward Krishna, they directed you towards them. That was the uniqueness of Prabhupada, and even now, after all these years, the other gurus are more so-called famous, really, than Prabhupada because they directed people towards them, whereas Prabhupada directed us toward Krishna and was very humble.
Srila Prabhupada gave some wonderful classes. The one I remember the most was a class in the new temple room where Srila Prabhupada said, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, among thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection, for self-realization. And out of many thousands of such men, only one may know me in truth. And so then Srila Prabhupada looked around at the temple, and the whole temple room was packed, and the whole balcony was packed. I was sitting up in the front of the balcony so I could see clearly. And Srila Prabhupada was looking at all of us, and he said, so does this mean that only a few of you are going to become Krishna conscious and be with Krishna? He said, no, every one of you can be with Krishna. Every one of you can know Krishna in truth. You have come to Krishna after past lives of making progress in spiritual life. But Srila Prabhupada was saying that when we come to Krishna consciousness, we take up where we left off in our past lives. So someone might come and they might struggle with the very simple things, even after years. And someone might come and they might very quickly become a very advanced preacher or have wonderful spiritual realizations right away. And Srila Prabhupada explained that that's because of past development in past lifetimes. But Srila Prabhupada was saying that every one of you can be with Krishna.
Prabhupada was coming to Los Angeles. We lived in San Francisco. I went down with Jayananda and would spend a few days in LA while Prabhupada was there. And Prabhupada had the habit, of course, of coming down those stairs and then coming out that side door and then getting into his car and going for a walk. And so the devotees would kind of hang out there just so they could get a glimpse of Prabhupada walking to the car. So I got there early one day. I wanted to be right there in front and see Prabhupada. I was there, nobody else was coming. It was cold, and I was scantily dressed, just my dhoti and no shoes. And so I'm thinking, where is everybody? This is going to be fantastic. Prabhupada can't miss me. I'll be the only one here. He's going to come out and go on his walk. This is going to be so far out. But it started getting later and getting close to class time. I'm waiting out here. I'm not even going to get in the temple room, basically. So I finally think that, well, Prabhupada's not coming. I got to get over and get into the temple for class. So I start making my way in to the temple, and it's like packed. And Donavir comes over to me and he says, do you want to put sandalwood pulp on Prabhupada's forehead? And I said, sure I do. So that got me right into the temple. So Prabhupada comes in and he greets the deities and sits down. And I guess somebody urged me, okay, now it's time to do that. So I got up there and stood in front of the Vyasasana, and Prabhupada leaned forward, and I put the sandalwood pulp on his forehead. And all I can remember was like sticking my hand in a wall socket or something like that. It was just like, it was electrifying. I don't know why. It was probably just all in my mind that this is Prabhupada and this was just really special. That was a special incident. And that was all. I just sat down and listened to class after that.
One time, Rameshwar Prabhu called us all into the temple room for an emergency istigosti one evening and told us that Srila Prabhupada was in Hawaii, but he was very, very ill, and he was coming to Los Angeles that night, but no one should go to the airport and greet him. We should be very quiet around the temple. No one should try to ask for darshans or anything like that. Prabhupada was ill and he was coming to rest. We wouldn't see him at all. So at the end he asked for questions. Now my only service to Srila Prabhupada, a direct service, was to make these cookies that he gave out to the children. So I raised my hand and asked, well, should I make the cookies? And he immediately said, cookies? I've just been telling everybody that Srila Prabhupada's so ill. You think Prabhupada's going to give cookies to the children? And I just felt so bad. So then I went home and I was crying like anything, telling my husband, but it's my only service to Srila Prabhupada. And I guess to pacify me, he said, never mind, service is absolute. So you go ahead and make the cookies and bring them over, just as you usually do, bring them to Guru Puja. And later you could offer them to a picture of Srila Prabhupada and distribute them in the playground to the children. So that pacified me. And the next morning I got up early and I very carefully made the cookies. And I set them out in a beautiful silver plate. And I brought them over and tucked them behind the Vyasasana. And nobody expected Srila Prabhupada to show up for Guru Puja. We knew he had arrived in the night, but we knew he was very ill. And just before the curtains were to open, suddenly the door to Srila Prabhupada's quarters opened, and there was Srila Prabhupada, looking so ill, and he was being held up by two people. And the curtains opened, and they laid him down to pay full dandavats in front of Shushi Gornitai. Then they had to pick him up again. He was so weak, and they helped him again in front of Rukmini Dwarkadish and laid him down again, up and again in front of Lord Jagannath. And by that time, they were back at his door to go back to his quarters. And Srila Prabhupada said, no, there should be Guru Puja. And so they helped him up to his Vyasasan. And so we had a very short Guru Puja. And then they climbed up to help him down, and Srila Prabhupada said, no, there should be class. And so then Srila Prabhupada gave class, and I remember that even though he was speaking into the microphone, you could hardly hear him because he was so weak, and he was sitting with his head, all like fallen forward. He was so weak. So then again, after a short class, they went to help him down again, and Srila Prabhupada said very audibly into the microphone, no, where are the cookies? The children are waiting for their cookies. And I went, oh, I've got the cookies. And I ran and brought the cookies. I was so happy. Srila Prabhupada remembered the children. He was so ill, but he had that heart for the children. And ill as he was, he waited till every last child, he'd given each one personally a cookie, and then he broke up the rest. By that time, there was a huge kirtan, and he threw the rest of the cookies out into the crowd of all the dancing brahmacharis, and everybody just went wild.
There are so many different sides of Prabhupada and qualities and characteristics. You couldn't count them all. And you always felt that Krishna was there speaking through Prabhupada. Prabhupada was giving gifts to Krishna. Very divine things were happening right in front of your eyes that you knew it was taking place, and you were just a witness to it. So in these scenes, as I recall, Prabhupada, he had visions of building temples, and they involved the transfer of funds. American BBT had become very successful, and Prabhupada had a formula from the very beginning. 50% of the money will be used for books, and the other 50% will be used for building temples. We had considered those buses as temples, traveling temples, so we were allowed to do that. But Prabhupada had this great grand vision of the whole world and the future, and laying the foundation for the movement throughout the world. And so he would, out of this vision, direct, in this case me, to understand what he wanted and understand where to transfer money, how to account for it, make sure it got to the right place and was used for the right purpose. And so some of this was done in correspondence, some of it was done in phone calls, and some of it, when I was fortunate enough, was done in person. When devotees requested Prabhupada's help to buy a farm, sometimes then the money would come from BBT. We were sending a lot of money to Mayapur, and we were sending a lot of money also to Bombay. So Prabhupada's vision was so all-encompassing and global. We didn't know what was going to come up next. We just knew that he had already seen everything, and now it was just unfolding, and he was letting us in on it, step by step. That's how we experienced Prabhupada building up the movement. I wouldn't even use the word business because it just doesn't do justice to what was really happening, this great grand vision. And Prabhupada just directing like a conductor in an orchestra, all the pieces to fall into place gradually. But he had already seen it in its full composition, grand performance, and we weren't there yet. Prabhupada already saw it completed, and you just got that sense that you were dealing with Prabhupada in past and present and future just blended together.
I had gone to America to form a little collecting party for Mayapur. So in Los Angeles, Prabhupada had arrived from somewhere, and he was up in his quarters, and most of the devotees had gone out on chanting on Sankirtan, And I was staying in a room opposite the temple, and I was looking out at the temple and at the dusk, you know, with the evening star, and I was thinking, geez, I'd like to go up and see Prabhupada, but I don't want to just kind of burst in on him. And just as I was thinking that, Upendra came walking out of the temple across the street, and he looked up and he saw me and he was waving me to come. I opened the window and he said, "Oh, Prabhupada wants to see you." So I went up to see Prabhupada, and it was very sweet, very quiet, and Prabhupada wanted to know about Mayapur, and we were talking about Mayapur, and he was saying how he used to visit the Chaitanya Mat, but it was very difficult for him because when he visited the Chaitanya Mat, he'd have to stay in the room with all the brahmacharis on a choki bed, and he said their noses were always working. He said, "This world is a horrible place, but Lord Krishna said to me, you come down and write those books." And I said, "Oh, I do not want to go there. It is a horrible place." And Lord Krishna said, "No, no, you come down and write those books. I will take care of everything." And I said, "No, no, I do not want to go there." But he insisted, "You come down and write those books. I will take care of everything." So he said, "You just see how Krishna has taken care of everything for me." That was a great revelation, an extraordinary thing that Prabhupada was saying. And I looked at Upendra and he looked at me, and it was just like electric, the atmosphere.
Prabhupada would have a group of devotees come and sit, and Shyam Sundar would tell the different philosophies of the different philosophers for the philosophy book to be compiled. So while we were waiting for the class to start in Prabhupada's room, I was sitting right in front of Prabhupada's desk, and Prabhupada was sitting at his desk, and I was chanting my rounds, and I was chanting very nicely and very attentively, and I was pronouncing very properly, and I was chanting out loud. And I was chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, again and again and again. Prabhupada had been very quiet, and at a certain point, Prabhupada raised his voice, and just from total silence, Prabhupada said, "No sound," and raised his hand up in the air with his palm probably about 2 or 3 inches from my face. And all my pride in trying to please him by my nice chanting was just totally shattered. What I understood from that is that one shouldn't make a show of their chanting in front of the spiritual master. You're supposed to chant on the side, not showing off, chanting for your own purification and calling out to Krishna to please engage us in his service, but especially not to make a show of our chanting.
Mahaprabhu, they have already taken 1.5 lakh from me.
Now Gopal Krishna in India requested that BBT give him a loan of $160,000. In India, just this during the Mayapur festival, he requested a loan from a US BBT for $160,000, which would be used to construct the second residence building.
So how will you pay back?
His plan was that the American temples would purchase rooms, and over a period of 4 or 5 years, they would pay that money back. So is that still approved by you, by your divine grace?
Yes, I know that.
The only thing is that we will have to delay the loan, because for the next 3 months, all our money will be used to print these 17 books.
Castable books, then loan. However, we cannot hold up printing, that is not possible. This you must always keep in view. We are not going to, the surplus money we are going to pay. Not that at the cost of stopping printing. You must always keep it. When you require money for printing, there is no question of loan at temple. This should be our
I had written an article for Back to Godhead magazine about how we're not the body, very basic philosophy. And the editors thought that the written part of the article was fine. They didn't have a problem with that. But they questioned my illustration for it because I more or less dissected the human body into different parts, the head, the chest, the legs, the arms, and tried to point out how we're not these different parts. And the editors felt it was too anatomical, and they didn't really want to use it. But they thought that since Srila Prabhupada was there at the time in Los Angeles, I should ask him his opinion. So I went up to Prabhupada's room with a mock-up of the article showing the illustrations, and I explained to him the concept. And I didn't get the answer that I was looking for, either yay or nay, but I got something far more valuable, because I saw that although Prabhupada had thousands of disciples and dozens of temples all over the world, so many responsibilities, he gave his full undivided attention to this one teeny tiny little disciple and teeny tiny little article, 3 or 4 page article. It was like nothing else existed for those few minutes. He was fully present to this question that I was asking, and he was unhurried. He was not going to make a quick decision, but he really looked at the illustrations and thought about it. And on top of that, he was very thorough. He felt he couldn't make a decision about the graphics without also reading the text that went with the graphics. So it was a great lesson for me in terms of making decisions in Krishna consciousness. It's not a snap decision, but it is a meditation to see Prabhupada's mindfulness and his presence and his focus and his thoroughness and his thoughtfulness, even for a small question that's put before him. Later on, this article was published in the September 1975 issue of Back to Godhead magazine. The illustration with all the different bodily parts wasn't used, but instead a painting by one of the devotees.
The artist had a meeting with Prabhupada in his quarters, and at that time, Bharadwaj was having all the artists take drawing classes where the model would move around and run around in the middle of all the artists and then run out, and then the artist would have to remember and then draw it after. So I just couldn't relate to all these drawing classes, partly because it was too difficult for me. So we wanted to ask Prabhupada whether he actually approved of these drawing classes. So during this meeting, Parikshit Prabhu was asking Prabhupada about the classes. And Prabhupada answered, yes, morning and evening classes we should have. So Ramaswar said, no, Prabhupada, we mean the drawing classes. So Prabhupada said, but I mean the morning and evening Shastra classes. The real technique of any art is hearing and chanting. It doesn't matter what else you do for the rest of the day, but you must attend the temple classes. Then, by advancing in Krishna consciousness, the Lord is in your heart and He'll give you directions how to do your art.
The 1st of October 1972 is when I got married to Jayatirtha. This was the first marriage in New Dwarka that we didn't actually get married in the temple room, because some devotees were getting married and not taking their vows seriously. And Prabhupada was getting a little disturbed about that, because they were getting married and then they were leaving the movement or they were leaving their partner. So Jayatirtha had been married once before and his partner had left. And so Prabhupada said, no, you can get married, but not in the temple. So we got married in Nandarani and Dayananda's garden down the road on Watsiko. And there were 3 couples that got married at the same time. So we invited Prabhupada to come because he was in New Dwarka. And Prabhupada wasn't feeling that well that day, so no, he didn't come. But he said to bring him prasadam. So we had the wedding, and then Jaitirtha and I went in to see Srila Prabhupada in the garden. And so I came in my pink sari, you know, tied together, as one is, you know. Just straight off the fire sacrifice, you know. You come in and we had the prasadam and everything. And Prabhupada was giving all these lectures, I just remember, about a beautiful wife is the enemy to the husband. Prabhupada had a wicked sense of humor, though. So anyway, I was bringing the plate in, and we had all the gopi dots on, you know, everything was in order, all beautifully attired. And Prabhupada was sitting on his chair in the garden, and Prabhupada looked up and he said, "Oh, she is beautiful." And then he winked at me, and I went, "Oh no, I'm already an enemy." I didn't say that, that's what I thought. And then Prabhupada said, "Oh, come, sit down, you know." And so he brought him the plate of prasadam, and then he took the drink, and it was an almond drink. And he took a sip of it, and I can still remember with his little finger up in the air, you know how Prabhupada did in his silver goblet. And then he looked down at the plate, and then he said, "And she can cook." And then he used to move his head from side to side, you know, like, acha. But it was just the sense of humor Prabhupada had at that kind of really important day in my life. It was just so warm and loving, and it was like he was my father.
I remember one time we were in the garden, I asked Prabhupada about chanting fast, japa. And he said, yes, you can chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. But you must hear all 32 syllables. He demonstrated. And then he said, Haridas Thakur was chanting fast. He was chanting 333,000 names. So he asked how many rounds that was. Karandar calculated it was 192. Then Prabhupada said, so if he was chanting 5 minutes per round, how many hours would that take? And Karandar said 16. So I said, yes, he was chanting 16 hours of japa.
If you do not know the art, and if you want to do some benefit to the others, then that is cheating. Suppose a physician, he does not know what is the medical science, and if he wants to become a physician, that is cheating. Quack.
I hope through the study that I'm doing with the devotees and the book that comes out of it that it will help them not be cheated any longer and show them the right way.
Yeah.
He's advising his patients that they should chant Hare Krishna and come to the temple.
Then is then you are friend.
Another thing I would like to do is go to Gurukul and test the children and show what NBC did was very false and unfair.
On television, they did a very bad story on Gurukula.
Yes, then they cheated. He wants to cheat and get some money. That's all.
He wants to
because the whole so-called human society is combination of cheater and cheated. So anyone who is acting without Krishna consciousness is a cheater. And anyone who is thinking himself advanced without Krishna consciousness is cheating. This is the basic truth. I mean Krishna consciousness, God consciousness. Without God consciousness, everyone is cheated.
We were walking right along the shoreline, and Prabhupada was talking about the pebbles on the shoreline, that we are like those pebbles. He said, Tatastha Shakti means in the margin, and turn toward Krishna or away from Krishna. Sometimes the pebbles are covered by the water, and sometimes they are uncovered. He made it sound like it was almost very random. But he said that's similar to the position of the living entity as marginal energy. For him, the Tatastha region wasn't an area in space or something. It was the attitude of the souls. The jivas form the Tatastha Shakti. They have the capacity to turn toward Krishna or away from Krishna by nature. And that is the meaning of this marginal energy.
On one of these walks with Dr. Judah, Srila Prabhupada was explaining that the way to become Krishna conscious is through the practice of devotional service, of sadhana. And that if you don't practice getting up in the morning, going to arti, chanting, shravanam, kirtanam, all the various ways to practice devotional service, then there's no question of you becoming Krishna conscious. You can't become Krishna conscious without engaging in the activities of devotional service. And so I made some kind of comment, some kind of foolish comment came out of my mouth about the importance of this or that. And Srila Prabhupada turned around and told me that he had been explaining this to me for 100 lifetimes. And all the devotees went, oh, as if that was a compliment, that Prabhupada had to come back 100 times to save me from ignorance. But Prabhupada actually meant, at least I took it in a way, that this is how foolish you are, that after 100 lifetimes you're still not getting the message that Krishna consciousness has to be practiced.
One time on one of these walks on Venice Beach, I said to Srila Prabhupada, because you always want to say something that Prabhupada would appreciate. I said to Srila Prabhupada, it seems to me that since you've come here to Los Angeles, the deities are looking even more beautiful. And Prabhupada was walking, and after a few moments, Prabhupada said, that is my anxiety. And he didn't say more than that. He just kept walking. And naturally, I'm puzzling, that is my anxiety. And then after a few moments, Prabhupada said, that is my anxiety, that when I am no longer here, you will neglect the deity worship, and then everything will be finished.
Can you say it like that? Any static things that nobody has? Maybe we have not seen him or has seen God. That is quite possible because we have not studied all the men of the world.
Yes.
Then how you can say nobody has seen? You have not seen the man who has seen him.
So the man
he will not admit his fault. He will accuse others. Nobody has seen God. Why? You may not have seen, but why you say nobody has seen? You have not seen that person who has seen God. Therefore you say like that.
So those people who wrote the Bible did not see God.
That is, when God is canvassing, here I am, Krishna, they will not see it. And still they accuse nobody has seen.
Krishna Kirtana Kala Nartana Paramu Prema Metamani Veera Jana Priyakaro Mema Pujitam Sri Chai Tanna Kripa Bharau Sri Chai Tanna Kripa Bharau Bhuvi Bhuva Bharava Antaraka Bande Rupa Sanatana Raghujudav Sri
Get the deities ready and all, and then the frankincense and myrrh was just bellowing up, and then the temple room was ready, and Govinda prayers start, and the doors open, and Prabhupada just kind of swanned in, you know, just with so much dignity and majesty. And then he would just pay his obeisances to the deities. And it was an extraordinary when you were a pujari and he would just be there and you would be just doing your arti, but just totally conscious that Prabhupada was right behind you as well. And what an honor it was. And it was something that I just absolutely loved, dressing the deities. And actually every aspect of deity worship was something that I just kind of fell into, and it just became natural. And one day Prabhupada came and he was standing by the deities. I could just see out of the corner when I turned around. He was really looking at Krishna. And I just really felt that he was seeing Krishna, because of course he was seeing Krishna, and we believed he was seeing Krishna as well. And so then he gave class, and, you know, we did the offerings because it was a matter of cooking and pujari work. And word came down, Prabhupada wants to see you. I went, oh gosh, Prabhupada never asked to see me before, you know? This is the first time Prabhupada wants to see you immediately. And I thought, oh gosh, what have I done? And so I took the apron off and went upstairs, and Prabhupada was just sitting there on his asana. And I just went in and I offered my obeisances to Srila Prabhupada, and there he was. And I just remember, he just had a gamsha on. It was like massage time. And there was a window behind Srila Prabhupada's asana in his room. And the morning light was kind of coming through. And I don't know if it was diffused light, but I just remember he actually looked golden. And he was just smiling at me when I came in. And Shruti Kirti was there, and he sat down. And so, you have dressed the deities. And he was saying, Krishna is looking very beautiful. Thank you so much. And I said, well, thank you, Srila Prabhupada, because Krishna wouldn't be here without you. And then he said, oh, thank you so much. You are doing very nicely. He was just so merciful. And then he said, always serve Krishna. And this life will be perfect. And the next will be perfect because you'll go back to Godhead. So that was the nutshell. So simple. And then he waved over to Shruti Kirti and he said, give me my purse. Then he dips his hand into his purse and takes out $20, which in 1975 was quite a lot of money. And he hands me the $20 and he said, this is for the deity worship. And I said, oh, we'll use this for the new outfit, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, very good. Very good. And he said, continue as you are. You are doing very well. And I just thanked him for the opportunity to do the service. And here I was kind of lamenting because I never got to have much personal service for Srila Prabhupada in the sense of being in kind of the inner circle. And then actually that was just a fallacy, really, because in doing whatever we were doing, we were in the inner circle, and it wasn't about externals. It was about just being present and doing our service. And Prabhupada just, he was just reaching out, and that was so wonderful. Having that little intimate exchange, that few minutes, has been one of the gifts that Prabhupada's given me.
At the New Dwarka Temple, it was arranged that every evening at the last arti, there would be a performance for the deities, for the pleasure of the deities. But there were no devotees there normally, just the deities and maybe a few scattered devotees who were still up. And our night was Wednesday, the theater night, and we would do a different leela each Wednesday, and we would dress up in full costume and makeup, and Prajapati would read the leela, and we would act it out in mudras and dance. And it was so beautiful. It was like performing for the king and queen. You know, you'd come in and you really felt their personhood by doing a full-out performance. The principle of deity worship that Prabhupada introduced to us gave us the perspective of really not just seeing the deity, but feeling the presence of God in the deity through these activities.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Muspat Paramangsa Paribrajagacharya Sitaresvara Smadhati Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada ki Jaya Ananta Koti Vaishnava ki Jaya Ramacharya Sri Haridas Thakur ki Jaya Prem se kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakti ki Jaya Sri Radha Krishna Mokh Gopinath Sam Kund Radha Kund Giridhar ki Jaya Vrindavan Dham ki Jaya Navadvip Dham ki Jai, Ganga Mai ki Jai, Jamuna Mai ki Jai, Guru Dwarka Dham ki Jai, Swami Bhaktivinda ki Jai, all glories to their Supreme. All glories to their Supreme. Thank you very much.
All glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. All glories to you, Prabhupada.
So Krishna has given you a very nice engagement, husband and wife. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram.
Yadabara was filming Prabhupada chanting japa in his quarters, and I was taking still photographs as Prabhupada walked back and forth. Yadabara ran out of film, so he left the room to change his film, and I was there with Prabhupada. At one point, Srila Prabhupada stopped walking, and he stood in front of a large painting of Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj. And he said to me, "Such an old man, and still he is chanting." So I didn't know what to say at the time, but on reflecting on it, I felt that this was Prabhupada's instruction, that we go on chanting, that we don't stop because of old age or any other physical reason, but instead we learn to relish the chanting and take shelter of the chanting and understand it as our connection to Krishna and our connection to Srila Prabhupada by following his instructions.
I felt very fortunate because, you know, I got to see Prabhupada when he wasn't with his disciples, you know, when he wasn't busy training them in management in so many different ways or chastising them for mistakes they had made and being involved in seeing that the books were being produced and just all these different services he was doing for his spiritual master. And then at various times in the day when the doors closed, Prabhupada was just there by himself. And they're the times that I liked the most because he was a devotee of Krishna and Prabhupada loved Krishna. And you would find him in his room reading, and sometimes from the servant quarters, all of a sudden you would just hear the harmonium. It wasn't Krishna Kanti, you know, coming in and recording bhajans. Prabhupada was just doing bhajan. And whenever I heard that, I would run into the room and I would offer obeisances. And as soon as I would sit up, Prabhupada would just give me the nod, get the kartals. And I would just play kartals, and Prabhupada would play the harmonium. And he would just chant. It's one reason I stayed with Prabhupada as long as I did, because I found being with Prabhupada was just very peaceful for most of the time. And it was amazing because, as we know, Prabhupada was doing everything. He was running everything, the entire society, the BBT. taking care of so much mail every day, doing the classes, the morning walk, instructing devotees. But somehow or other, it seemed like there were hours where Prabhupada was just alone. And he was a devotee of Krishna. And he was very sweet. He was doing everything he was asking us to do, just develop our love of Krishna by chanting and hearing, and so many times reading his books. He would walk around and chant in his room, just chant on his beads, walk around. And sometimes he would jiggle his bead bag, and you could hear the beads in his bead bag. But there was just this peacefulness that was amazing because of everything that he was doing. But as soon as the door closed, it was all gone. It was just Krishna there with him. And Prabhupada was happy. Even someone like me, you could pick up on some of that, and just feel so peaceful to be with Prabhupada. It's like you didn't want to be anywhere else at those times.
When most of these professors came, Prabhupada was always, ready to take them on. He didn't get friendly with many of these professors, but he would always encourage me to bring more. And then we would work hard to cultivate a relationship to get them to come to see Prabhupada, and then Prabhupada would just smash whatever their philosophy was, or whatever their point of view was. But there were a few that Prabhupada liked, like Dr. Judah and Theodore Rozek. Prabhupada was also very nice with him. And I think that was more because they came with a devotional attitude. They didn't come as if they were the great erudite scholars. When they came, they had a sense who Prabhupada was. They knew they were in the presence of a holy person, and then Prabhupada would treat them differently. But if they came all arrogant and puffed up, then Srila Prabhupada would immediately say, "And so, what is your philosophy? What are you thinking about this?" And he would immediately challenge them, and just tear them to shreds. And if you listen to any of the dialogues here, you'll see that Prabhupada would go right at them and usually be very challenging. And I think Prabhupada wanted to use these interactions as ways to give the devotees, the confidence not to be afraid to speak up. You would get a sense that there was kind of like a Japanese kabuki theater drama going on, and Prabhupada was more or less showing you how to do it, regardless of who their positions were, to present Krishna consciousness fearlessly, not to hold back and be overly polite. Especially true if anyone brought up meat-eating subjects. I can remember lots of conversations where Prabhupada would talk about how the cow is already giving you the equivalent of its blood in the form of the milk. What is the reason for killing the cow? Why take its blood when it's already providing you this? That theme would come up a lot. But mostly, he would always get around to talking about how do you think life came about? How was the universe created? Why do you think you're here? Do you think you're the body? How do you substantiate your sense of who you are? Changing body. Those were the most common things that he would speak about. And then he would always bring it around to talking about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that you are part and parcel, and you can't be happy unless the part is serving the whole, and you won't be happy. He didn't treat anybody other than the way he would deal with regular devotees. Didn't matter who it was.
Now, whatever you like, you can do. Krishna never forced him to accept the teachings of Bhagavad Gita. He gave him the independence. Now, whatever you like, you can do. And he agreed. Yes, now my illusion is over. I shall act, as you say.
I came because it was Leela Shakti that was there. I don't think she was initiated yet. I wanted to hear the man that was responsible for the movement. And I wanted to see what was going on, Who captured my daughter? Not that she didn't need capturing. But when we walked into the temple, that was my husband and I, the sun was coming through the window and shining on this man. He seemed to be engulfed by the sun, like the sun was purposely coming just for him. Mind you, I was not a believer at that time. My first impression was that his whole demeanor had the strength of a lion. He appeared to me that he was giving off so much energy, so much strength in this man. Yet there was a kindness to him that I felt. And he appeared so large. I was so surprised when he did stand that he was not so big. I don't remember what he even spoke about. I was just mostly involved in just looking at the man. He finished his talk, and then he said, "Would there be any questions?" And of course, my hand went up. Yes, I have a question. If this movement that you speak about is so necessary, why was it so late in coming here? And I'm thinking, here, my daughter was a hippie back in Illinois, involved in drugs and whatever, you know? What took you so long if this was so important? And he said, that's a very good question. It wasn't late. You were late. And the devotees, they applauded. And he turned to them and he said, and you were all late. The devotees squelched down when he said, and you were late. You know, they thought that he had won a debate with me. Actually, mine was just an innocent question. Where were you all these years, you know? And I had hoped that we would have more conversation about this, but he went on to speak a little bit more. But I was determined to meet him again. I did come back the next time he came to town, and I requested meeting with him. He was someplace in another room. He was told who I was, and he asked my husband what he does, what kind of business he was involved in, and Sam said that he operated an antique shop in Santa Barbara, and he said, and what kind of antiques do you carry? What do you sell? And Sam explained anything that was old, which it was. And I remember Prabhupada saying, that's very interesting. And of course, he was very, very, very nice to my husband. Very nice. But we may have spent a good 30 minutes or so with him. In fact, prasadam was brought to him and he offered it to us, which I thought was so nice. His prasadam he offered to us. He was very happy that parents like ourselves were agreeable. He asked me about the other children we had, and I told him we have 2 sons and their feelings towards their sister's involvement. And he listened. He listened to everything I said. He gave me rapt attention. Whereas I would have liked to have asked him more things, he was actually interviewing us. Now that I think of it, I'm sorry I can't remember my entire conversation with him. Some of my memory has left me with this advancing age. The next birthday I have will be 87. The third time I met him, I already had started the Friends of Krishna program, where I was writing to devotees' families. And he said, Mrs. Forkash, you are doing very nice work. Very nice work. He asked me if I chanted, and I said I did. He said, but you know, you should be wearing tilak. And he pointed to my face, and he said, right there. I said, what is tilak? And he called the girls over, And he said, Mrs. Forcash will wear tilak. Well, they did apply it. And I swear on everything, I did not have this until the next day when I washed the tilak and this remained. And I tell you, I went to a dermatologist and I asked to have this removed and they could not take it off. And it's still there. That's something.
Announcements were being made that Srila Prabhupada was concentrating on his translating work and he wanted to get a lot done, and devotees should not bother Prabhupada. Only GBCs or sannyasis could go to see Prabhupada, and the usual requests for guests and such would be minimized. So I was a small temple president in Phoenix at the time, and I had a $50 donation to give Prabhupada. It's just like nothing, you know. So Rakshana was guarding Prabhupada, and I made a little pact with him to let me up the back stairs. And we talked to Srudakirti, who's Prabhupada's servant, and he also agreed to let me in just for a minute. So it was 9:20 at night. So I was a little afraid of breaking the laws, but I just wanted to see Srila Prabhupada so much. And so Srudakirti opened the door, and I came in behind him, and Srila Prabhupada had his hand in his bead bag and was facing away from us, looking out the back window, down the alley past the temple. And Srudakirti said, Srila Prabhupada, this devotee from Phoenix has come to see you. And Srila Prabhupada turned around, and as he slowly turned around, the fear of interrupting him and being insignificant was fairly strong, but when he turned around, he had the biggest smile on his face. And he was just radiating warmth and love from his heart and giving me a greeting like, oh, my dear son has come to see me. How kind. And I really learned from that experience that all of us are equal in Prabhupada's eyes, and whenever we have anything to offer to him, or if we have any love to give him at all, we should just do it without any rules or regulations in regards to status or standing in ISKCON or anything. We're all equal in his eyes, and he was just happy to see his lost son coming to him for shelter. It was a memorable exchange. It just with one look, Prabhupada could just pierce your heart and change your whole life in one glance. I gave him the check as I was leaving, and he said, thank you very much. And then what happened later was about 3 months later, I got a letter from India, from Prabhupada, which was surprising because I hadn't written him. And it was a thank you note for the $50 check and the donation. And he made a personal note and said something, preaching to me that pleasing the spiritual master is the way to please Krishna. And I just thought it was wonderful that he would acknowledge not only me, but also the small donation that we had given him.
That is human being. You should be inquisitive. Why this happening? Why this happening? And he should take education. That is human life. And if he does not inquire, if he does not take education, then what is the difference between him and the dog? He remains a dog. He has got this opportunity of human life. He should take advantage of understanding what is what. Not to keep himself in the dog status, simply eating, sleeping, sex life, and defending. That is the distinction between dog and human being. If he does not become inquisitive, how to control the mind? He is not even human being. And dog never inquires. Dog knows that when I bark, people become disturbed. He never asks how to control this barking habit. Because he is dog. He cannot do that. A human being can do that. People hates me. I do something wrong. I have to control my mind. That is human.
One time, I invited Professor Benford from the University of California, Irvine. He's a particle physicist, and he had some interest on something beyond science. And in the garden, Prabhupada's garden, in the course of discussion with Professor Benford, Prabhupada was asking that you scientists are spending so much time in studying a piece of grass. What is the color of the grass? And then you dry it and you try to see what are the components that make up this grass, then what are the molecules, the atoms. So on a piece of grass you can like volumes and volumes of books. Then Prabhupada was asking, but what good is that knowledge? And Benford said, well, scientific knowledge is a different category of knowledge. Those who are pursuing scientific discipline, they get great satisfaction and a great happiness in doing these things. Science is very useful. And then Prabhupada said, you think that from bullock carts to motor cars and aeroplanes, do you think this is advancement? And Benford said, yes, definitely, we are making progress. Prabhupada said, this is not correct, because by this type of knowledge, you are forgetting your own nature, your own spiritual nature. You are forgetting who you are and what is the purpose of our existence. So this most fundamental knowledge you are neglecting. So therefore, we are not making progress. Then Prabhupada asked him, do you believe in God? And Professor Benford said, not exactly, that I am agnostic. Then Prabhupada said, well, you're agnostic means you're doubtful. Sometimes you think that there might be God. Sometimes you think that there might not be God. That means you are ignorant. So then he said, yes. So he was not angry or he was not upset. And so in this way, Prabhupada was treating in a wonderful way. Although Prabhupada has a strong philosophical principle, but the way he treats people and the scholars, they feel very comfortable and they always had respect. But that day, that Sunday, was also the marriage day of Jayatirtha. There was a huge feast. So during that conversation, one devotee brought a huge plate of all these preparations, full, to offer to Prabhupada. So what Prabhupada did, he took the whole plate and they gave it to Benford. This is for you. This is a Mahaprasadam, please take. So Professor Benford was completely amazed because he didn't expect that. The whole place is going to come to him. And he took so much prasadam, one of the main preparations, this eggplant preparation. I still remember he was so much fond of the eggplant. And then after when it gets a little dark, then Prabhupada also went upstairs. And the Sandhya Arati started. And Professor Benford said, I'd like to have a little experience about this singing. It seems very nice. So I took him inside the temple, and then he joined Arati, and then he said it was getting a little late, and so he was wanting to leave. But he said before he left, he wanted to see Prabhupada. He wanted to say goodbye. So I took him upstairs to Prabhupada's room, and on the way there are some plates, these prasadam plates with a lot of eggplant. And Professor Benford picked again one more plate. He ate again this eggplant. Then after that, we went upstairs to see Prabhupada again. And then this time, he was so impressed by Prabhupada's dealings with him as a spiritual authority. So he said, I'd like to thank you for having me here this evening. And you are doing so much wonderful service to train these American young boys and girls learning this culture, and it is a wonderful thing. And so he was giving a tremendous appreciation to Prabhupada, and then he left.
Once going up to Prabhupada's room in Los Angeles, Bhardraj was walking into Prabhupada's room a little bit ahead of me, and Prabhupada said, "Where is Rukmini?" And he said, "Oh, she's always busy doing something." And then I walked in slightly behind him, and Prabhupada saw me, and he said, "Yes, always stay busy, busy, busy. Otherwise, Maya will say, 'Come and play with me.'" And he held out his arms like someone trying to embrace someone. He said, Maya will say, come and play with me.
Education means enlightenment. You do not know what is the final cause. The huge body is working as nature. So many planets, so many big planets like sun, moon, they are floating in the air. And who has made this arrangement? There we see every day. And everyone is speculating. It is being done like this. Another philosopher comes, he does, it is like this. Another says, it is like this. Nasum nijjasamatam na bhinnam. A philosopher is not a great philosopher if he does not defy the other philosopher. Is it not? So this process is going on. I defy you, you defy me, that's all. But what is the real fact? Neither you know, neither I know. But we write big articles. That is going on. I was also a student of philosophy. My professors are all Europeans. So one professor, Dr. W.S. Arkuat, he was our professor for psychology, metaphysics. Later on he became the Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University. A very nice gentleman.
Dr. Mize finds that he's chanting Hare Krishna a little in the shower now. When he takes a shower, he chants a little now.
One press reporter in the Berkeley University in the beginning, he wrote his article and he read that after hearing this Hare Krishna for a few minutes, I came home chanting all the road Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. We are living beings, we are conscious, we cannot give up anything, but we are being trained up how to utilize everything for Krishna. That is Krishna. So giving some prasad.
It seemed like the day that I got initiated, Srila Prabhupada was really enjoying himself. He was laughing at everybody, really. There was one boy named Asura Kulanasana. Srila Prabhupada said, do you know the meaning of your name? And he said, it means the killer of the descendants of the demons. And he said to Asura Kulanasana, do you know who the demons are? And Asura Kulanasana said, the karmis? And everybody was laughing. And Srila Prabhupada raised his eyebrows and looked around and said, the demons are the scientists. And when he said that, Swarup Damodar sat up straight and said, oh, but Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada was laughing. And he said, no, not you. So then Srila Prabhupada asked me, what are the 4 regulative principles? And how many rounds do you chant daily? And I told him. And then he said to me, are you insured? And I thought he said, are you sure? So I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, I asked you if you are insured. He said, because you have a spot on your face, because I have a mole on my right cheek. And he said, once there was a movie star who had a spot on her face and she had it insured for a lot of money. And when he said that, he just laughed, and everybody was laughing. Swarup Damodar, whoever was there at the time, all the sannyasis, he was literally shaking and laughing. And I was so embarrassed, I couldn't even think of what he was saying. I was just thinking, they're all laughing. And then he said, Krishna consciousness is your only insurance. Your name is Chinmayi Devi, spiritual potency.
The devotees in Los Angeles once arranged for some theologians from University of Southern California, which is nearby the temple, to come to meet Prabhupada. We always like to hear Prabhupada speak to other people who have not yet accepted Krishna consciousness, because we were going out in Sankirtan and meeting the public, and we wanted to see how Prabhupada speaks with these kind of people. So we were always eager to hear Prabhupada, but we were not always allowed to come back early from Sankirtan. This time I was wanting to come very badly, and we came early, and the garden is very small, so not everyone could fit. So we were looking through the holes in the wooden fence, and we could see Prabhupada. And whatever we could not hear, we would afterwards hear the tape. Actually, the same thing was on morning walks. If we would walk in the back, we could also not hear Prabhupada very well. But we would afterwards hear the tapes, and then we could understand. So this time also Prabhupada was speaking to this theologian. At first he was talking about how the animals are actually very expert. They may fly in the sky, and then they go into the water and they dive into the water and pick a fish out and eat it. And how an eagle 7 miles up into the sky, he can see from up there where there's a carcass, and he dives down and swoops at his prey. He can see so high. So they're actually very advanced. They can do things that we as human beings even can't do. But he says actually the difference between human beings is that they should understand what the problems of life are. Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadi, Dukkha, Dosha, Nudarshana. So Prabhupada, after some time talking in general, then they were introduced to him. And one was Zilson Judah, who liked Prabhupada very much. And he had done some research previously into the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And the others, they did not know anything about Krishna consciousness. So one was introduced to him as having studied modern theology. When Prabhupada heard modern theology, he was kind of laughing, and he was saying, so God is modern? We in Krishna consciousness are being taught by Prabhupada right in the beginning, Dhammam tu Shakshat Bhagavad Pranitam, that only God can enunciate religious principles. And we know from Bhagavad Gita that Krishna is consistent. What he has taught to Arjuna 5,000 years ago, he has also taught to the sun god Vivashwan some millions and millions of years ago. The same wisdom. And there's no change. He remains consistently giving us this knowledge. And therefore, when this professor was saying modern theology, Prabhupada immediately understood this is hoax, this is cheating, And then after that, he became quite stern, and he was talking about how you're a theologist, but actually theology means that we know God and that we abide by his laws. Theos means God, and theology is the science of God. So someone who knows about God is the theologian, and then automatically abides by his laws. And I think you mean to say Theosophist. Theosophist means a person who is in search for God, who does not know yet God, but he's eagerly searching for God. And then the professor was saying, so is knowledge, does that mean that is the end of search? Prabhupada says, yes, automatically. Can you not do both? Prabhupada says, no, this is illogical. Once you know, then there's no need for searching anymore. Sometimes we as devotees also may have thought, Prabhupada is very strict with these people. But actually, he had to be strict because actually they're cheating. They're presenting themselves as authorities, and they're teaching at big, big universities and get all kinds of degrees. And naturally, a young student will take them as an authority. But that is cheating because they don't even know about God, and they're presenting themselves as someone who does know. And therefore, people are wasting their time hearing these kind of speculations, which may be accepted now, and in a few years, again, they're overthrown. And so then he said, so we accept from higher authorities. I'm not presenting whimsically a God. I'm presenting how I heard it from my spiritual master and from the great acharyas in the past. Therefore, what is the difficulty to accept what I'm saying to you? Dr. Sturgeon Judah, he was kind of representing everyone else, and he was saying, maybe because we are older, it is a little difficult for us to take up something new. Then Prabhupada said, then you're not serious. If you really want the truth, if you're really in search of God, when it is presented to you, presented in an authoritative way, then you should accept. So, in a very short time, he showed that it was actually cheating to present oneself as an authority when one has no knowledge. So I came from a family of theologians, and to me this was just extraordinary to hear Prabhupada speaking like this, and that really made it clear in my mind that I have done the right thing by taking up Krishna consciousness and by taking Srila Prabhupada as my authority. Because I could see, previously I was living amongst these people, and even on a dinner table, they would talk like that about God in a very speculative way. And I was never satisfied with that. When I was a child, when I was 12 years, I was praying to God, please let me know more about you. You're very kind that you've sent Jesus, but I want to know more about you. And these people were always speculating. And I felt not only that, they were cruel. They were harsh and cruel in their way of speculations. Anyone who couldn't keep up with their arguments, like I was a young girl then. It was always high above my head what they were talking about. And I felt they were cruel. They're not sensitive to anyone else who may truly be interested in knowing. If you're not on the level that you can argue with them, then you were left out. But Prabhupada never gave us that sense. We were always included. He wanted us to know. He was eager for us to understand. So I felt Prabhupada is very kind. That is a real, truly spiritual person. He's knowledgeable, authoritative. He himself has accepted a guru from a line of teachers, and he's presenting Krishna as he is. I just immediately felt comfortable with Prabhupada. I never felt like I was cheated. I never, I felt like Prabhupada is truly an authority that I want to surrender to. And my relationship with Prabhupada was always that I felt really, really close to Prabhupada when I heard him speak. Either he was preaching to someone else or he was giving classes to us. And I felt so close to Prabhupada. I felt he's my well-wisher, he's my friend, he's my father.
So you may love humanity, but because you do not love Krishna, therefore do not love the cows, you send them later on. So your love will remain defective. It will never be complete. And if you love Krishna, then you love him, the small ant. He's not interested even to kill him with an ant. That is real love.
Dayananda and Nandarani, his wife at the time, and a devotee named Uddhava, had gone down to open up a center in LA from San Francisco. Prabhupada had asked his disciples, to those that knew a little bit about preaching, go open up centers. So they had chosen to go to LA to please Prabhupada. And they found this little storefront on Pico Boulevard in a middle-class African-American neighborhood. And so about a year or so later, I got this letter from Nandarani and Dayananda that they needed someone to come and help them run the LA temple. Actually, she was going to her mother's house, and Dayananda was going to be away, so they wanted somebody there to run it. And nobody was coming at the time. It was just a storefront. Nothing had really been established, There were no devotees. They had no real programs. So I went to LA, and I was there by myself, actually, for several months, I was in the temple alone, and Prabhupada started to write me letters saying, it doesn't matter, nobody is coming, you can just chant to the walls. Krishna will hear you. And so many letters I had where he said, don't get discouraged if nobody is coming now, because very soon your temple will be successful. Just work sincerely and everything will happen. So my program was to just have the morning arati, which was a little later than now, and we had a picture of Panchatattva. I would get flowers, We had very little Lakshmi, maybe like $200 a month to maintain everything. $100 paid the rent and $100 was for everything else. When I started to communicate with Prabhupada, he would encourage me to do things. So then I wanted to please him. So little by little, I'd make contact. People started to come around and contact with some of the local papers and the free press and put advertisements. And gradually, 1 or 2 people started to come around, and then some devotees from San Francisco came down to help, and things started to progress little by little like that. Mukunda had come, and Umabati had come down and stayed for a while, and we were contacting different places, and Prabhupada used to write that if we make him some engagements, that was the way you'd get him to come to your temple in those days, to have some speaking engagements, preferably at a college, something on television like that. And so I tried to do these things, even though I was petrified of talking to people in those days. I was very timid and very shy. But somehow or other, Krishna gives you the ability to do these things. And so I had some nice clothes from my Karmi days, and I put on a very nice, expensive suit and a tie. We weren't shaved up, but I'd wear tilak. And I went down to some of these stations. Went to, I think, KITV in LA. They had these afternoon talk shows. So in addition to the TV and radio shows, I had arranged for Prabhupada to speak at UCLA and at Long Beach State College. Somebody told me that the International Student Center at UCLA has guest speakers. So I thought that would be a good place for Prabhupada to speak. But not being experienced and very expert, I went down and spoke with somebody there, and she asked me if we were proselytizing. And I didn't even remember what the word proselytizing meant, even though I had college education. I became befuddled, and when I told that to Prabhupada, he said, "And did you tell them no?" But I didn't even know what it meant. I was ashamed to tell Prabhupada at the time. But she told me that she couldn't sponsor us like they normally did. She thought it was a religious thing. So she said she'd give us the use of one of her rooms, but we'd have to advertise and do everything else. So I thought, well, that's all right. So I went out and I printed up maybe 100 or so flyers, which was really nothing. And I stood on the campus and gave them out. Jayananda sent the money down from San Francisco, and I printed them up because we had no Lakshmi in LA. I realized now it was really like giving out one flyer, It really was so insignificant. But at the time, I thought it was the best that I could do. And we cut up a huge amount of fruit, and Mukunda was in LA at the time. And we drove out there with Prabhupada, and we had this room. It was like a huge classroom. And nobody showed up, not a person. So we're sitting there, and Prabhupada is waiting, and then he finally looks at me and he said, "So, Aniruddha?" And again, I felt like I was so insignificant. But I couldn't say anything, so he just looked and he said, "That is all right, we'll have kirtan." He always made me feel wonderful afterwards, because he knew how timid I was, so he related to me in that way, where some devotees he could really, like Tamal Krishna, he could yell at. With me, it would really shake me up, so he knew how to handle me perfectly. Always made me feel he was so grateful, actually. It just reminds me of what a fool I am. So we had kirtan, and after kirtan, there was an Indian student that saw some Swami inside, so he came in out of curiosity, and he sat down and he had a conversation with Prabhupada. The boy was challenging. Prabhupada was saying, "So tell me, where are your Indian countrymen? Why are they not here?" And the boy had no answer, and he said, after pausing, "I'll tell you, they are lost. Hare Krishna." So that was that engagement. The other engagement was at Long Beach State. They told me I had the use of either an indoor classroom and I could arrange for people to come, or that there was a huge area where all of the students took their lunch, where they had a podium and they had speakers during the day. So I thought that might be better because at least we had some kind of a guaranteed audience. So again, we drive out to Long Beach, and it turns out that it's this huge mall area, the size of almost of a football field. Everybody spread out. I found out later that they'd have any kind of speaker would get up there and speak about any kind of nonsense that would arouse the students. It could be, hippies or whatever. And there was nothing to cover Prabhupada from the sun. I didn't even think about it. So we get out there, and Prabhupada stands up there, and he looks around, and he looks over to me, and he says, "Get me an umbrella," because nothing was covering Prabhupada. And all of a sudden, somebody handed an umbrella. And then Prabhupada looks at me and says, Aniruddha, this is not very nice. I felt very badly. But he sang the normal things in the beginning that he would always sing. Bandeham and Govinda Jai Jai, Shri Ram Jai Ram. That was his program. Then Hare Krishna. And there was no way of asking questions, so he just spoke something very seriously, you know, something very heavy about Vishnu and four-handed forms and things like that. And then we left. So when I drove him back in the car, I felt very badly, so I apologized. I said, Prabhupada, you know, I don't remember exactly my words. But he just looked at me and smiled and said, that is all right. Then after all that, when Prabhupada left LA and went back to San Francisco, from that time on, he wrote me regularly. And the first letter that he wrote me, he said, my dear Aniruddha, please accept my blessings. Despite my ill health, I was so comfortably situated when I came to LA. Thank you so much for your strenuous service. Single-handedly, Krishna will bless you, rest assured. He said, now we are in San Francisco, and they are arranging for me to speak at different universities, and they are very successful, just as they were in LA. So, you know, he just would lift me up. Then I realized that Prabhupada really only saw the attempt. He understood that I didn't know really much, and he gave me some credit. So he was always so merciful in that respect. It meant a lot to me, believe me.
He may challenge, so long you have got little life for a few years. But God will come and drive you away from your present right, prestigious position. Get out. So unless one is madman, he cannot say there is no God. Anyone who denies the existence of God is a madman.
Prabhupada, wouldn't it be better to say he's blind, he's stupid?
Yes, the same thing. The mad is the sum total of all stupidity. When I say mad, it is the sum total of all kinds of stupidity. Now you can give them prasadam. I think we have occupied that time.
All across America, wherever Prabhupada went, he would be taken to the park for the morning walk at 6 o'clock. And wherever he went, you see the parks were empty. Not a single person. This is before the jogging craze, the health craze. So everywhere we went, they're very nicely manicured parks, taken care of. Nobody was there. So Prabhupada's telling the story of the snake and the mouse. The mouse digs the hole and makes the little house, the hole in the ground. Then the snake comes along, goes into the hole, eats the mouse, and then lives comfortably in the hole. The snake can't make the hole. The mouse had to work very hard, but the snake is enjoying it. So Prabhupada was saying that, because we get up early in the morning, that's our religion, and we have these very nice parks just for our use. They're maintaining it at their expense, labor, and we're enjoying it.
In the winter of 1974-75, I was very sick. with very poor digestion and tried to cure myself with fasting and in a diet with no milk or grains. Well, the diet didn't work, and I lost a lot of weight. Srila Prabhupada visited LA that winter, and when he saw me, he said, "What has happened to you?" I explained my problem, and he said I should just take a little prasad. Then he added it could be selective, but just take a little prasadam. I tried to follow Srila Prabhupada's instructions as best I could and started eating grains and milk and rapidly gained my weight back. On this Denver morning walk, the subject of diets came up, and the devotees were critical of the dieting because that had become somewhat of a fad. When Prabhupada heard the comments, he said, yes, we should all eat prasadam. Let what may happen, happen. Simply, we should all eat prasad. Then Tamal Krishna Goswami said, yes, that's the best thing, Prabhupada. Let us die eating prasadam. And Prabhupada laughed and he said, that is devotee. Let us die eating prasad. So I thought I would add my opinion. And so I said, Srila Prabhupada, I'm a good example that these diets are not good. I can testify. When Srila Prabhupada heard my comment, he stopped and turned and looked at me and he said, the diets are not good, or you are not good? At that moment, my mind went completely blank. I just couldn't say anything. It was really something to think about because, you know, it's not the diet. I mean, the diet is just something that somebody has an idea that this may be good and they embrace that idea. Looking back on it, it was extraordinary how with just a few words, Srila Prabhupada exposed my foolishness.
I remember distinctly Prabhupada was talking about the potency of prasadam. And he said that prasadam is so potent that any animal that eats prasadam jumps over all species of life and takes next birth as a human. Then also one godbrother, Padmanabha, was selling incense or jewelry at that time, and he would always drive. That was his Sankirtan. He wouldn't do books, but he would drive. And because of that, he couldn't eat, heavy prasadam in the morning. So that was like a bone of contention because at that time, we'd overload everybody with khichdi and just a huge breakfast prasadam. And generally, when you eat a whole bunch and you start driving, you tend to fall asleep at the wheel. So that was his concern. So he asked Prabhupada about eating other things besides those things that are offered to the deities. And Prabhupada, of course, was very practical in saying that you don't have to eat everything that Krishna eats. Krishna eats very opulently, but you can eat simply fruit, and not that you're forced to eat the opulent things. If it doesn't suit your body and your service well, then you eat simply. So there was a gap in the conversation between the devotees and Prabhupada, at which point I decided I was going to jump in with a question that had been on my mind. I had distributed books for a long time, and I would constantly be bombarded by people's statements. So why don't you get a job? Stop harassing me, why are you asking for donations? And so many comments that would affect my mind and my faith. So I asked Prabhupada, I said, Prabhupada, sometimes we get the comments that, as devotees, that we're trying to escape this material world by living in a temple, asking for donations, and that we're not being responsible human beings and taking up regular 9-to-5 type of jobs. And he responded very kindly in that he didn't blast me for for my lack of faith or lack of understanding of our position as devotees and disciples and followers of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and in the mood of Sankirtan. And Prabhupada, he went on the entire walk from that point on, talking about this very point. He said, does a rich man's son work? We are sons of Krishna, and Krishna is the wealthiest man. A factory owner, he's very wealthy, but does he work? No, he employs others to engage and do his business. Does that mean that he's lazy, that he's not productive because he himself doesn't work? So he was giving some analogies like that. So he was able to dispel my doubts that morning walk about the non-necessity of having to go back and get a 9-to-5 job, that I was actually doing the proper service. And he was just so compassionate. He would look at me and very lovingly, and if I didn't understand one point, he would come up with another analogy so that I would really get the point. And that's the first time I really felt a personal connection with Prabhupada.
And this one morning, I remember he was hammering me on this one point because I kept on saying that the living entity grows. And Srila Prabhupada was saying, no, not growing, changing, second by second changing. And for some reason, I just could not understand that concept that the living entity is changing at every second. And like the picture in the book with the different movie frames, I was thinking that the body is growing because I wasn't looking at it as in a spiritual context at all. But I was so conditioned to this way of looking at things. The child is born and then it grows. And Prabhupada was hammering this point home with me. That, no, this concept of growth is wrong. The body is changing. Every second there's a new body and a new body like that, changing. But he must have hammered it on me for about 10 minutes, you know. And I was so thick, I just could not understand the concept at all. But finally, I began to understand it. But I realized actually on this walk how conditioned I was by my so-called education and, you know, Darwinism and all this other nonsense that you're fed when you're growing up in America. To understand Krishna consciousness, I had to like unlearn a lot of things too before I could even, you know, grasp some of the basics. So it was kind of an awakening for me.
Lokanang hitakanang dirbhuvane mannang sarannakanang.
When Prabhupada came into the airport, they had planned for the television and different people to interview him. So they brought him into a room, but then nobody showed up. And I just remember Prabhupada was very undisturbed. You know, we were all upset that it didn't happen. And then they took Prabhupada back to the temple. The Denver temple's very long, and at that time we just had little Radha Krishna. And when they opened the curtain, Prabhupada immediately called Brahmananda over. And he was saying that little Krishna didn't have a peacock feather on. And we were all amazed that from such a great distance, his Vyasasana was way in the back of that temple, that he immediately saw that and had them fix it.
In Denver, it was just after LA, and all of the problems that were there in Los Angeles and the political situations of the organization, of management of the society were weighing heavily upon him. And at the same time, when he was in Denver, there was an undercurrent, not a major theme, but an undercurrent of problems with householders. There were also other problems with some sannyasis. I forgot who it was. And it seemed to be in America, Prabhupada was very much preoccupied with disturbances. Whereas in India, he was preoccupied perhaps with fighting with people who were trying to take away lands. I think he was less disturbed by that than he was by the disturbances with devotees.
I'll never forget Vishnu John putting Radha Damodar into my van. I had a Volkswagen bus. Vishnu John sort of reclined on the little bed type of thing I had there, and the murtis were placed carefully on the seat. And as I drove to the park, he was singing some beautiful song, and I just was in ecstasy. And I just made sure I wasn't driving too fast because I didn't want to see Vishnu John or anything else go flying. But I felt so fortunate. We arrived at the park, and they had a great kirtan group. It was sort of one of the first, what I would call kirtan bands at the time.
Vishnu John Swami would be playing harmonium and singing, and then we would play the various instruments that he had accumulated over the course of time, like the Esraj that you see Sri Ram here playing, the Ektar, which no one in ISKCON at that time was playing, and then we'd have various sorts of drums and percussive instruments that the other brahmacharis would play or guests would play that were usually musicians. That was basically what we did. Prabhupada was extremely pleased because it was a devotee-making program. There are many brahmacharis that came as a result of our traveling, preaching, and presenting the chanting of Hare Krishna and the distribution of BTG magazines and other books. Secondly, it was the way Vishnu John Swami had arranged it. The deities were, of course, were always captivating. The exotic instruments, his deep and melodious voice, and his sheer enthusiasm for chanting the holy name. People literally were captivated upon seeing this whole presentation.
My father drove my wife and I and my daughter, who was an infant at the time, to Chicago to Rath Yatra Sri Prabhupada. When we arrived, the devotees were on their way to the airport, and they had not found the car. They had some old, inappropriate car to pick up Prabhupada, which was so fortunate for us because my father happened to have a Cadillac at the time. So that car was taken for picking up Srila Prabhupada. It was very nice. And then he came back to the temple, and my father was given a chance to meet with Srila Prabhupada. So they had a discussion, and my father started with that the Western people were devils. It was sort of a broad, very broad statement. Prabhupada responded, "No, why?" And he said, well, they've dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, and mentioned that when he was in the Pacific in World War II, that some of the sailors used to drop the Japanese prisoners of war off the boat to see them be eaten by sharks for sport. Prabhupada said, no, they attacked you. And my father accepted that. But it was a nice exchange. Prabhupada was very kind and respectful. At the time, my father, I think, he would have been 54 years old, which I thought was extremely old at the time. I'm now 55.
I had gotten a magazine at a concert. John McLaughlin and his Mahavishnu Orchestra and the devotees gave me this magazine. I said, oh, this is Mahavishnu. After coming to the temple for the first Sunday feast, I continued to come. I never missed one Sunday feast. I kept going and started chanting regularly and attending the classes. And on Friday after I got off from work, I would get on the train and try to make it to the temple and stay there all weekend. Devotees would drop me off on Monday at the train station. They would be going on Harinam, and I had to go to work. And finally I said, I don't want to go to this job. I want to stay and chant with the devotees. Finally, after that, I joined. When we were going on the book distribution, I traveled from Chicago to St. Louis to Texas to Oklahoma, Arizona, and all the way up to Los Angeles. And I ended up staying in Los Angeles. But somehow I still wasn't convinced by the devotees' behavior. A couple of things happened that were a little disturbing. So I said, Prabhupada's coming to Chicago, so I'm going to go back to Chicago and meet Prabhupada. And I'll know then for sure whether I'm going to stay in Krishna consciousness or whether I'm going to leave. Took the bus back. It's a very hot 3-day ride on the bus. We were painting the temple and waiting for Prabhupada to come. And finally the day arrived. The devotees were going to the airport. I also wanted to go, but they told me that I couldn't go. I had to keep on cleaning the temple and getting everything ready for Prabhupada to come. When the car was on the way back, they called and says, okay, Prabhupada's on the way. All the devotees should get ready to have kirtan out in the front. So we went outside to wait, and the car pulled up, and Prabhupada was sitting in the back seat. And they opened the door, and Prabhupada got out. And immediately on seeing Prabhupada, just uncontrollable tears just came down my face. And I didn't think I was a crybaby type, but something that was just uncontrollable. I couldn't control it, but then I knew that actually, yes, this is the messenger of God. I was completely convinced from that point that Prabhupada was definitely Krishna's representative. There was no doubt about it. So I said, okay, Krishna, I'm not going anywhere. And I made a vow at that time that actually I would continue to serve Prabhupada regardless, no matter what actually happened, you know, in the long run. Whoever went, whoever stayed, that somehow that I would continue serving Prabhupada.
The day before Srila Prabhupada left Chicago, there was a great celebration in the temple. 4 small sets of Sri Sri Gaura deities, brass deities, were installed. And while the devotees chanted the Maha Mantra and read from the Bhagavatam and other scriptures, the deities were given a full abhishek, and then they were dressed, and then each set was carried out to a different bus, a Radha Damodar bus. And each set was to preside over that bus while the devotees preached and sold Prabhupada's books. So when that was complete, Srila Prabhupada gave a talk, and he mentioned how pleased he was that now with these buses, devotees could go from town to town and city to city and distribute books explaining the science of Krishna consciousness. He said, materially, racing around will not help us in spiritual life. We were allowed to be advanced materially, but we should never forget our spiritual duty and our spiritual identity. If we do forget those things, then our human form of life is wasted. So after this talk, then there was an initiation. 75 devotees became initiated at this time. And we could see how Prabhupada was pleased by the devotees' efforts, how Krishna consciousness was being spread successfully. This pleased Prabhupada very much.
Krishna Kirtana Gana Nartana Prabhu Premamritam Banidhi.
I was fortunate to film Srila Prabhupada at the airport arrival in Philadelphia, and I remember how thrilling that was, because when he would walk through the airport and everybody chanting and dancing in ecstasy, it was an experience that's hard to describe how satisfying it is to be in his association in public with so many devotees. I remember the officials from Philadelphia who were nervously dealing with this arrival of this VIP, but they have greeted many VIPs at the Philadelphia airport in their day, but they never greeted a VIP who had such an entourage and with such sound. All the senses were engaged. It looked so great, it sounded great, it smelled great with the garlands. And this police official who was there, who was a high-up official, was a little bewildered at first, but he was steady in his own way because he didn't lose his cool. And as I recall later on, he was very proud of the festival because he got swept up in the transcendental ecstasy of Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement.
the devotees rushed to the arrival gate to meet Srila Prabhupada. And Ambojaksha, who had never seen Srila Prabhupada, turned to me and said, "What should I do? Where should I go? Tell me what to do." He actually said that to me. "Tell me what I should do." And I said, "Ambojaksha, just go stand by the asana that's been set up for Srila Prabhupada, because you know he's coming there, and you can position yourself right next to Srila Prabhupada." So we agreed, and we both went there. So as Srila Prabhupada came and sat down, a devotee lady approached Ambojaksha with this huge plate of fresh cut fruit for Srila Prabhupada and gave it to Ambojaksha. So Ambojaksha offers the plate to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada takes one fruit, pops it into his mouth, and then does the Bengali drinking style with the water. And for Ambojaksha, it was just perfect.
This is the first time Prabhupada had been to Philadelphia, when there was a temple there. Before, he stopped off at Butler. On the way back from Butler to New York, he stopped off at the University of Pennsylvania, October of '65. Then he came to Temple University once, spoke in Swami Nikalananda's course, made some devotees too from another program. Prabhupada also met with scholars while he was in Philadelphia. Tom Hopkins, who he was really, really quite favorable to. And this professor from the Temple University, my religion department, Babhuti Yadav, and Prabhupada raked over the coals. It was so heavy with him. Prabhupada said to him, "What do you teach?" He said, "Hinduism." Prabhupada said, "And what is that Hinduism?" And Professor Yadav made the mistake of saying, "I don't know. You tell me, what is that Hinduism?" Prabhupada said, "Oh, you're teaching. You do not know?" He said, "This is our Swarab Damodar. He's also a PhD. Let us ask his opinion. He says he's teaching, but he says he does not know. What is your judgment?" On cue, Swarab Damodar says, "Cheater, Srila Prabhupada, that is called cheater." This is how it starts. Prabhupada says, "So, he's called you a cheater." It got heavier and heavier. Finally, Yadav admitted he was a cheater. He said to Prabhupada, "Yes, I'm a cheater, but I'm an honest cheater." Prabhupada didn't give him a break. He said, "You say you are honest, but the judgment of a cheater cannot be accepted." So he was demanding that Prabhupada tell him what Hinduism is. And Prabhupada said, "First, you become shaven-headed like these. Then I will teach you. Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya." Babhuti Yadav says, "I did when I came in, I offered my pranams." He folded his hands together. And Prabhupada said, "Then my first instruction to you is stop this cheating business." Oh, and the GBC and everybody were just shooting daggers at me, because Prabhupada was quite visibly angry. And I didn't know what to do. I had brought him and everything. And there were some graduate students there, or friends of mine, who couldn't believe it, what Prabhupada was doing to him. Another point, Prabhupada had quoted the verse, "Mamekam sharanam braja," just surrender to me. What is the meaning of surrender? Yadav said. Prabhupada turns to his secretary, "Hand me a dictionary." And Yadav bristled. He says, "No," he says, "I want the Sanskrit etymological meaning of sharanam braja." Prabhupada leaned back and looked at him and said, "We cannot waste our time." He said, "You don't want a guru, you want a Sanskrit teacher." So finally Yadav left. And the GBC were gathering around Prabhupada, showing him favorable newspaper articles about Gita Nagari and trying to calm him down. I felt so horrible. But the next morning, I was driving Prabhupada for his morning walk. I'd stayed up all night long thinking of an apology. And he got in the car, he started driving, and he said, "Srila Prabhupada, I'm very sorry. I brought that professor to see you. I didn't know he was such a demon." And Prabhupada looked at me. He said, "Oh," he said, "No, it's all right." He said, "At least he was chastised." You can see me there, I'm looking quite concerned because the car's not there. There's the airport manager on the left. Prabhupada's there, but I am not blissful because the limousine is not there. The famous Cadillac limousine. As the reporter asked them later, they say you're very humble, but I see that the devotees brought you from the airport in a Cadillac limousine. You're so humble. Why did you drive a Cadillac limousine? Prabhupada said, the spiritual master to be worshipped on an equal level with God who rides a golden car. So this Cadillac, he said, was not enough.
When we left the airport lobby and came out to the street, there was a pause, I remember, waiting for the vehicles to come. And Prabhupada just stood there on the sidewalk, and he had such nobility. Prabhupada was the most noble person one would ever possibly meet in their life. And to see him standing there just waiting for the cars with all this activity going on around him, and he was just such a steady, calm presence for all his disciples and everyone who approached him.
Everyone was on the porch waiting for Srila Prabhupada to come back from his morning ride. And we were lined up. I was standing up on a buttress a few feet higher. I was able to see everything pretty clearly. Throwing flowers and very ceremonious. Srila Prabhupada came out of the car and he was going in to give a talk. And just at that time, this little girl came running out from the crowd. And she started asking Srila Prabhupada, when I make the garland, I don't know to put first the red flower and then the white flower, and then you put the needle in like this, and then and she started asking Srila Prabhupada extremely specific questions about how she could perform her service of helping to make the garlands. And Srila Prabhupada very lovingly looked down, and instead of directly answering with words, he took off his own very opulent garland and put it on this little girl's shoulders and said, just study how this is done and then you can do it nicely. And everyone was very happy with that exchange, especially the little girl.
Srila Prabhupada is ushered into the temple room, small temple room, and he's surrounded by GBCs, and then the rest of the men came in. And it was so small that the ladies couldn't even come inside. There was one window on the side of the room, and their noses are pressed against the window, trying to see, at least see Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada's about to speak. And then Prabhupada notices them in the window, and Prabhupada says, you have to make room for them. They want to hear. Remember that. They want to hear. So he insists that all the leaders and then the rest of the men squeeze in closer to him so all the ladies can come in and hear. And it just struck me how he did that, because Prabhupada was always very attentive to everything that was going on. And he saw them, how eager they were, and he just immediately, you have to make room for them. They want to hear.
For Srimad Bhagavatam class, Prabhupada was reading from the story of Ajamila. He had somebody else recite the verse in purport, and that devotee said, then Ajamila cried out 3 times very loudly, Narayana, Narayana, Narayana. Prabhupada said, have I said 3 times? It is not 3 times. Once is sufficient. Then at the initiation, someone else had chosen the names for the initiates. So they'd call the person up by their regular name, and then Prabhupada would ask what was their new devotee name, and the devotee would read from the list. I think it was Brahmananda. And several times Prabhupada would change the name. They had mentioned some name, and Prabhupada said, what is this? He said, it's supposed to be Bhubrit, meaning one who carries the planets. This name you have chosen means one who carries a heavy load. He said, where did you get these names?
That's my son Yudhishthira up there on the card. And Prabhupada joins us later on in the parade. It was a very long parade. And this year we're starting right in front of Independence Hall. We're going down Walnut Street and ending up at the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
That year we started going out college preaching, taking Gaura-Nitai with us, so we thought we would bring them for Rath Yatra. They sort of hide Subhadra But by the next year, we had heard instructions that in the future that Gaur Nitai should be brought on a palanquin separately, but not to ride up on the cart with Lord Jagannath. After that, if we brought Gaur Nitai out, then we carried them in a palanquin separately.
Srila and myself built this cart. We started about a year ahead of time because we knew Prabhupada was coming and we wanted to do something really, special. And we would just go to these demolition places that would tear down big commercial buildings. And Srila would just start going up to them and asking them to donate wood. And before you know it, we had these big, huge, long pieces of timber. Some of those beams were like 12 inches thick. I mean, they were huge pieces of wood. And so we just started building the cart based on what wood we had. No idea how big it was going to end up. And before you knew it, it was over 50 feet long. And then we had to come up with some idea for wheels because we had such a big frame. So then we went to some electrical companies and we got these big spools that they would wrap wire around them. And the biggest ones they had were 8 feet in diameter. Each wheel was 3 of these put together. After we put them together, we rented this big industrial bandsaw. And they were so heavy, and Srila and I were cutting these scallop edges around the wheels to give it this design. And then after we made the scallop edges, we would get these oak 2x4s, and we made spokes. And we had one devotee, Jim Newsham, he was a welder, and he welded the hub. We put it all together. Anyway, Prabhupada really liked these wheels. At one point after the parade, he stood there watching the wheels for about 15-20 minutes. And he asked Rabindra who built these wheels. And so Rabindra told him, and then he said, these boys are descendants from the architects of heaven. He really loved those wheels. So then we built this big, dome to go on top of it, and then we're trying to think of different ways to decorate it, and we have some artists. Kim Murray was one of them, and some other devotees came out and painted all these beautiful designs. Padaraji, made this beautiful canopy, and they're, painting all these swans around the cart. And I mean, the whole temple was just buzzing around like bees, thinking that Prabhupada's coming, and we really wanted to make this cart special. And then when we finally had it all together, Lieutenant Fensel came by, who was giving authority for parades, and when he saw this chariot and he saw the size of it, he said, "You're crazy." He says, "There's no way this is going to go down the streets of Philadelphia." And so we went over to him, we showed him, because we have a permit. We gave the sizes, when we applied for the permit. And he says, "I don't care what that permit says." He says, "There's no way you're going to take this cart down these streets." So Srila and I tried to convince him, and then Rabindra came, and he tried to convince him. Finally, it was Rupanuga. He came, and very authoritative, like somehow or another, he convinced this Lieutenant Fensel that we could do it. And so during the parade, this Lieutenant Fensel just kept following the parade, and there was different times when we had to fix things underneath the cart. And by that time, he was like so much into it. He actually came underneath the cart himself. He says, "Do you need any help?" And you could see his whole face was transformed. He went from this real miserable, authoritative, like policeman. He just became like really jolly. And he did everything he could, and he was like really into the cart. We started without Prabhupada. He wasn't there yet until we went around the corner, and then Prabhupada arrived. And when Prabhupada came, everything like came to life.
It almost rained every day. In fact, it was raining on the Rath Yatra. You can see it's overcast. And just as when Prabhupada was coming to get on the cart, the sun came out. That was the first time we'd seen the sun. I was really afraid it was going to rain all during Rath Yatra. Twice we went out for morning walks and we just drove around because it was raining so hard. First time we took him for a walk was up in the Wissahickon Gorge near the temple. The Wissahickon Gorge it's a forest in the middle of the city. Prabhupada said, "What is this jungle doing in the middle of the city?" And at that time, people were preaching there was a food shortage. And so he said, all these should be cut down and it should be planted. There's sufficient space to grow food for everybody. So then the next time we took him for a walk along the river where there's more like a park, and he liked that much better. But it was so rainy, Prabhupada said, this is just like India. He said in Puri it's always raining during Rath Yatra time.
From way up the street, the devotees parted and the car stopped and Srila Prabhupada got out of the car and walked toward the cart. It seemed like it was a great distance to me, but my very distinct memory is that as Prabhupada approached the cart, I was privileged to witness the meeting of great personalities, the meeting of Srila Prabhupada and Lord Jagannath. And I felt suddenly as if the devotees had melted away, the sound of the kirtan was from a distance, and I had a little peephole into this extraordinary exchange. The moment when Srila Prabhupada and Lord Jagannath greeted one another. I was insignificant in that exchange. I was just a little ant with a little glimpse, and it was profound. It was bigger than any emotion I've ever experienced. It was beyond this material world.
He offered his obeisances right on Walnut Street. My daughter said, this is the way she used to think, that street is so dirty, that's so moochy. How could Prabhupada put his head bowed down on the moochy street? I know he looked at it first, and by his glance he purified it, and that cleansed it, and then he bowed down. That's what she figured it out really fast. I don't think Philadelphia had seen such a huge crowd of devotees ever when Prabhupada was there. Every time the car would stop for a while, Prabhupada's lap would fill up with money. People would come up, offer obeisances, and put donations in his lap.
In the parade, I stationed myself right next to the wheel of the cart, right next to Prabhupada, and I had my son up on my shoulders. And I remember walking the whole parade, not leaving that wheel. And regularly, Prabhupada would look down, you know, like, and acknowledge our presence and smile at us, and my son dancing on my shoulders. And you could see Prabhupada was really, really happy. And then a few times he would throw flowers at us, and we would catch the flowers. And I remember at that time I thought Prabhupada looked really, really happy. I remember just thinking, I'm walking next to Prabhupada, he's on the cart, I'm on the ground, and I felt like I could walk forever, that he gave me the strength that I could walk for time immemorial in that kind of situation. It was really, really nice. And he looked so happy. He looked strong and happy and just like pleased and satisfied with the whole festival.
There's this fountain in front of the art museum, and there were bleachers constructed that were just for the bicentennial program. And these bleachers were just filled with people, looking like they were just sitting there waiting for the cart to come. And the parade route was for us to go around this fountain and then go to the back of the art museum. And we went around, and all the people in the bleachers were amazed. They were clapping, and some of them were standing up. And Prabhupada was so pleased that he instructed the people pulling the cart to take the cart around again. Those people in the bleachers were there for a whole completely another program, but by Krishna's arrangement, they got the most mercy.
And I was steering the cart, so I was just a few feet away from him. So I was constantly just meditating on Prabhupada, and of course I didn't have a lot of association with Prabhupada, so it was very amazing to me just watching how graceful he was. Every move he made, every little eye movement that he made with such full tension, and it was so graceful. And there were some Christians there as we were in the parade. They had their loudspeakers and they were saying offensive things, and I was really getting agitated. And I looked at Prabhupada, he was totally undisturbed. He was just so happy to see all these people in front of Lord Jagannath, and I don't know, it just was so special watching Prabhupada.
I couldn't understand him on the tapes, but whenever I read the Bhagavad Gita, the purports, it was almost as if I could just hear him, you know? That's why I studied the Gita so much, because when I would read the purports, I would hear Prabhupada. I just always felt like he was a special father to me. And I didn't think I could please him. I guess that's the sad part of the thing, is I thought, I've been looking for something like this all my life, but the standard is so high, something special is going to have to help me. I didn't feel strong enough, and I didn't want to cheat him. I thought he was too special to join and cheat him. My older brother was already in the temple. I was coming all the time, and I told my mother that Srila Prabhupada was going to come. I said, I'd like you to come here. So she says, okay. And my mother's Christian. She came, so then my 5 sisters had to come with her. And I really valued my mother's opinion. She couldn't understand why my brother would leave his wife and children to join the movement. She says, I won't criticize your movement. I just can't understand how someone could leave their family responsibilities. She had faith that I would read the literature and that I would be very honest, you know. So after she listened to Prabhupada, I said, what do you think? And she says, I think he's a very saintly, humble man. She told me. So I was glad she liked Prabhupada.
When we finally arrived at the park in Philadelphia, I remember there was an immense crowd there, and there was a great vista. It reminded me almost of Washington, D.C. in the mall, and Martin Luther King when he gave his famous speech, I Have a Dream. And so many devotees were there, but then there were so many people from the city of Philadelphia who just happened to be in the area, and everybody stayed.
Prabhupada gave a short address on this grassy slope in back of this museum, just as an example of what Prabhupada had to tolerate sometimes. I remember it was very popular at this time in America for young people to streak, just run with no clothes on. So all of a sudden during Prabhupada's talk, there were some streakers just streaked right across the place, and then but it didn't phase his divine grace. Sometimes he would work these things into his talk. He'd make some comment that would perfectly crystallize a point. But Prabhupada had to endure the streakers, carry on.
She was interviewing him the day after the Rath Yatra. The reporter said to him, devotees told me during the parade that there were invisible beings flying overhead showering down flowers, and that you could see them, but we could not. I was thinking, what an idiot. Talk to this reporter. She said, is that true? Prabhupada said, yes. He said, you cannot see them because you are envious of the spiritual master. No reaction, really. The article giving the amount of hostility she had was not bad. It was a big Sunday feature article for the magazine.
Try to read, try to understand, and take it very seriously, and you will be happy. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna